All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, this is the first installment of a new little stream series I'm doing with my friend Michael Moeller on finding God in the West. And we'll be talking a little bit about our specific spiritual journeys and how we fell away from our early faiths, mine in Protestantism, his in Catholicism, how we kind of got lost in the New Age, psychedelics, spiritual but not religious. And we hope to continue this series and bring other people on talking about them falling away from various forms of spirituality and faith in the West. So should be a fun one. Dr. Michael Moeller, how you doing today, sir?
Glory to God, man. I'm alive and feeling well. Glad to be here with you. Hoping we dive in and find some nuggets out here. So it's always fun when we get together and smash our brains together. I think it's been a little bit.
It has been a while.
I mean, you've been crushing it. What was your lineup this week?
It was, I think Thursday was St. Alfred the Great. Yesterday was World War III with the World War Now guys, and today's talking more personal. This is more of a chill stream, so not so much as an educational stream, but yeah, 3 days in a row. So been pretty heavy on the streams the last few days, but it's good.
Yeah, and if you haven't, those new clips are crushing it. The one you had with Peter.
Dude, shout out to iPack Arts, my thumbnail guy, and he's doing clips now. Phenomenal work. Major thank you and shout out to iPack Arts, one of our Orthodox brothers. Does great work and has really helped me out. So I appreciate that.
And then I know you showed off your new icons, but you want to show them again?
Oh, yeah. Major shout out to Orthodox Boomer Grandma, Alexandria Union. She sent me, for anybody who is interested, let me pull that up for people too. Union of All Icons. Let me pull that up right here. Alexandria Union sent me a brand new icon yesterday. And here we go. Here's the website, Union of All Icons. Let me share that with you guys here in the chat. Alexandria Union was in the chat one day, and of course, she and her husband have a great Union of All Icons where they sell Orthodox candles and icons. And she mentioned about sending me a Saint Isaac the Syrian icon. I said, "Oh yeah, I'd definitely be interested." And somebody asked, "What icon did I want?" And I said, "Well, I've always wanted a Transfiguration icon, but I haven't bought one yet." And she sent me a beautiful Transfiguration icon that you can get over at their website. So shout out to Alexandria. Shout out to Union of All Icons. Beautiful, beautiful icons. And here's one they sent me previously for my name day of St. Patrick of Ireland. So vibrant colors, really well printed. Big fan of the quality of the Union of All Icons. So I'm not getting paid for any of this, but I really appreciate Alexandria and her husband, and I really appreciate the quality of their icons. And so I love you, Alexandria. Shout out to you guys. And if anybody's interested in getting icons, go to their website and help them out. They would be ecstatic to get some more Orthodox brothers and sisters purchasing their icons. And they're really good quality, really good quality. So just want to give them another appreciation and a shout out. So thanks for that, Michael. Thanks for teeing that one up.
we got to support our Orthodox businesses. We got to stay together. I still got this right here.
We'll explain where that one comes from. Exactly. Shout out to Mel. She says, I got paid in icons. Exactly. And that's well worth it. So thank you so much to Alexandria. Wonderful, wonderful icons. Make sure you guys go check them out and get one. Yeah. So where'd you get that icon up there on the wall?
Yeah, I believe I got that one from you. If my memory is still working right for my baptism, which is just right over 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. Was that making me a sophomore now? Been in the faith 2 years. And that was one thing I chatted with you. I'd like to do a little more sharing of my story, right? Like with this series, I reached out to you and I said, it's strange how far we've come. And, before we were talking, I think probably a lot of people here watched the debate last night with Luigi and the Zoomer. Shout out to Luigi. I got to meet him. He's down in San Diego. And it's just like that. What is it that has us in our Western mind so blocked in? And I think I told you just the other night, I had a friend of mine who's Christian, and he's been talking to his other friend about Christianity. And there's just so many roadblocks when you say, hey, sola scriptura, or the Z word, or the jabs. And it's like, how does this all fit in with Christianity? And it's hard to go just from like, well, let's break down sola scriptura in 5 minutes and talk to a Protestant. And before you know, it's like, it doesn't work that way. And for me, a lot of those things actually had me falling away from the faith, which, we'll get into. But now that I'm 2 years in, I'm trying to do this whole Orthodox thing. And that's when I wanted to do some content on my own, but I thought it'd be a lot better if I got to chat with you. I talked to my priest a little bit, and there's plenty of other people online that are just absolutely crushing it. I saw Kyle just had a video on Judaism that's doing pretty well too. So there's lots of good people in the space. You connected me with Father Moses, so I've been able to chat with him. And
shout out to Father Moses.
Yeah, shout out. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that, to have you as my godfather and, good resource at times. Most of the time, you're a good influence. So,
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the time. Well, and I think this will be a really fun series because we hope to eventually have people like Father Moses on, and shout out to Ben, also known as Luigi. He had a debate last night. We hope to have him on, and Mark Rotella. Talking about their journeys falling away from Catholicism and finding Orthodoxy. And so we're not sure how many installments. I think tentatively we have probably 4 or 5 streams intended, but it may go longer. We don't know. But the goal is today talking about our own journeys on how we kind of fell away from what we were brought up in, and the spiritual maze the labyrinth that we went through to eventually find Orthodoxy. And so it's really supposed to be helpful to people that are more earlier in their search, earlier in their journey, and kind of just bring a lived experience perspective on how we got to Orthodoxy. And, we've been friends for a while, and we were friends well before either one of us became Orthodox. So it's been quite an interesting journey for both of us. And maybe we can begin there on like how exactly we met and became friends. And, before I became an official catechumen, I've talked about an ayahuasca ceremony and Joshua tree that I attended, and I've never let the cat out of the bag of who I was there with. So
I was the bad influence on that one, or good. It's one of those things God uses all things for good.
Yeah. Last time I did psychedelics was that trip.
Yeah. I like this comment, hard path to orthodoxy. It definitely isn't, it definitely wasn't easy. And, like in that instance, how many times I think you had come down at that point 2 or 3 times and chatted with me, and how many times we go to dinner, I'm like, well, so how does this work? Right. Or how does this work? And I think that's one of the biggest issues with people stuck in these Western minds is they don't have a you are me. And I get this. And obviously Father Bailey and Peter here, like Father Peter and Father Josiah, they're going to do a way better job. But there's also a level that we're called just chatting with people. Because when I'm out at dinner and I'm whatever Protestant or atheist, agnostic, I have a lot of New Age friends. Let's be honest, how many of them I go, hey man, you really need to go watch Father Spirit and Bailey. And there's kind of a gap between that and the modern world where people are like, I don't want to go listen to a priest. They've already, talking about Mount Bringing, people have been, unfortunately, I don't know what the word I want to use, just scarred from their religious experiences. Right. And so it's hard for them to be like, dude, I don't want to listen to a priest, but they are interested in what you have to say. Like when you had come down for that ceremony, you're like, hey man, I'm thinking about this whole Orthodox thing. And I'm like, I was raised Catholic. They're kind of like Catholic. And you're like, but what about the Logos? I'm like, yeah, I took Greek philosophy. I know about that. And there is a level of me, that the Orthodox spirit of coming to humility is hard because I thought I knew. I'm like, dude, I know all of this, Patrick. You're wasting your time. But then as you kind of unfolded, I was like, oh, wow, I've not heard the oh, yeah, John. I didn't realize that I didn't know the Old New Testament was written in Greek. You probably hear that people online talking about Aramaic or Hebrew. It's like, well, most of it is written in Greek from what we know. Paul wasn't writing to the Romans in Hebrew. Well, maybe some of them, but from my understanding, right, wasn't that almost all written in Greek?
Right.
So, and you have to peel those layers back, which is tough, and especially in a world where we think we know everything.
Well, yeah, and for Western people, I mean, very few even have heard of Orthodoxy. And when you say Orthodox, people immediately think of Judaism.
Yep.
And so it's really a failure to have a historical understanding and perspective. And I think that's part of the American mind. You know, I'm writing my dissertation right now, and I actually just have I was writing about the American myth. And so this book right here called The American Atom, this is actually a great little book I'm using for my research, but it's talking about how when America was formed, especially post revolution, that there was this millenarian Christian ethos that this was going to be the new garden. This was going to be the millennial kingdom. America was, and it had all this potential, all this land. And the American man was an archetype for Adam because, in a sense, history ended. And many of the people, especially those that were engaging in engineering, Freemasonry, the scientific exploration, they viewed America as the endpoint of history itself. And so it's, you know, because of that, I think the American mind doesn't have a historical perspective about really anything. So ancestry, family identity, culture, religion. So Protestantism sort of allows people to stay in this contemporary moment and really not have any sort of historical perspective on, like, where does everything come from? How do we get here in 2024? And why is the world the way it is? And that takes a deep dive into history, I believe.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, if you're curious enough, and I think that 9/11 and just kind of going back and looking at history definitely woke some people up. And I'll probably, like I think I've told you, I'll probably stop you several times among the stream just to double check that I know words that use Miller.
Millenarianism.
It's
So
from
yeah, it's the
Mills, right?
councils. So it was condemned by two councils, and the church fathers called it Chiliasm. And what it is, it's a eschatological theory. So there's pre and post millenarianism, both of which were essential to the first and second Great Awakenings in the United States. But that eschatological worldview believes that before the great judgment, so the resurrection or the judgment of Christ between those who will make it to the kingdom and those who will be condemned, they believe there'll be a 1,000-year millenarian utopian reign with Christ. So pre-millenarianism is that Christ will come and join them. Post-millenarianism is that Christ will come and that the 1,000-year reign will occur. There'll be a 1,000-year utopia, and then Christ will come after that, and then a great judgment will occur. So only the righteous, only the blessed will be able to experience this 1,000-year reign, and then the great judgment. Well, Orthodoxy teaches that there is no utopia that comes before the great judgment. In fact, often aspects of history are going to get a lot worse. So this was condemned by the councils, but like for my transhumanism research, this is what I'm tracing, is this idea that technology was going to redeem the lost attributes of Adam. So Adam had perfect knowledge. Adam had perfect senses. He had all this, this divine insight. Although from an Orthodox perspective, he was still an adolescent. And we, living in the post-resurrection world, are actually more privileged than Adam was. But this idea that really got going in the 800s was that technological innovation was a sign of God's favor, and technological innovation and advancement was redeeming these attributes that man lost due to the fall. And so eventually technology was going to fully redeem man back to prelapsarian, which is just the state before the fall. There's post and prelapsarian. Prelapsarian, before the fall, we're going to reattain the status that Adam had through technology. And so I think when you talk with Christians, there's so many different theories, but the concept of progress is really baked into the American mind, and most people aren't even conscious of it.
Yeah, and everything you just said really bakes into the idea of Graham Hancock, the lost civilization, which, and again, is the exact opposite when we look at Babel and, Enoch and the Watchers and the Nephilim bringing technology that ultimately led to our demise. Right, we're kind of revisiting that, so it's very interesting that a lot of these heresies, they're nothing new.
No, it's not.
But you can see how they definitely infect the modern mind of man, us included. That's kind of what you and I went down, that New Age path. And like we said, glory to God, that's how we met. Sorry, we went on a little tangent there, but that ultimately, I think I saw you on when you had your old channel,
Right.
Fractal Universe, and at that point, we can boil it back, but but I was big into Terrence McKenna and Alan Watts and Antoine Wilson and all of that stuff. And I think I posted some of your stuff to a lot of my New Age friends on Instagram. I was like, dude, you got to check out his art. How were you making your art at that time?
I was just using really Final Cut Pro and then layering different graphics on top of each other to create visual effects.
You did like symbol of the day, I feel, for like 100 days or whatever.
I
Remember
did.
that?
I think it was 40 some days in a row. That got a little exhausting. Every single day providing those little videos are actually still up. Most of I think everything that was psychedelic related I've already privated. But the symbol of the day series from back in the day, you guys can still check those out if you go to the old YouTube channel. It's now David Patrick Harry. It used to be Fractal Universe. But I remember the first contact I had is you reached out to me on Instagram when I was promoting all the psychedelic and new age stuff. And we chatted, and we were both from the Midwest. We were both into physical fitness and exercise and stuff like that. And once I moved to the Bay Area in Berkeley, that was when we finally actually met in person. And we had talked quite a bit back and forth, but it was actually when we went to that ayahuasca ceremony, I think was the first time that we actually met in person.
Yeah. When did you move to the Bay? 2017, 16? 18?
Yeah, early 17.
Yeah. So I'm from Southern Illinois, and I moved 2013. I moved to San Diego. I finished school in 2017, moved to LA. And, I think about 15 or 16 is when I started following your channel. I mean, those Terrence McKenna videos were blowing up, right?
They
and
were.
then did you found them in the Berkeley basement, or what's the?
Oh yeah. So that was we're all over the place. But yeah, while I was at Berkeley, so in the basement of the Graduate Theological Union. So obviously Berkeley was where McKenna went for his undergraduate. And Berkeley is the sort of psychedelic capital. I don't know if it still would be considered that, but it's from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It certainly was considered that. And the whole Bay Area, Haight Street, all that different stuff, Haight Ashbury. But I was with a group actually in a class, and we were looking at we were able to go with the librarian to the basement to see everything that the library had that isn't on display. And they had all these different files and religious stuff. And so then I was looking at these audio reels, and I saw all these Terrence McKenna ones that I had never seen those online. And at that point, obviously I was making money promoting Terrence McKenna and creating graphics to his lectures and stuff like that. And I saw like the Gnostic Astronaut, which was online, but it actually wasn't the real one. There was a lecture titled The Gnostic Astronaut, but there's the one that I found in the basement was the actual like 3-hour, almost 4-hour long lecture he had at Esalen about Gnosticism. And so I found that and a handful of radio interviews and a series he did that wasn't online. So I found that, and I was so excited to get those digitized and create videos from it. But as we'll get into, it was also during that same period that Trump, Peterson was happening. And so I was in Berkeley, kind of felt like I was at the pinnacle of what I wanted to do. And then realized that, feels like all my fundamental values are very different from all the people I'm surrounded by. Maybe I'm not as progressive or new age and all this different stuff. And that was kind of the catalyst that eventually led to what we're talking about, where, I realized that I wasn't going to be a professor at the university, just their control and them firing John Searle, the most famous philosopher still living right now, tenured professor at Berkeley since the 60s. And to see how easy and how much control the university had if you're an academic, I was like, I can't do that. And I had broken up with my girlfriend at the time and all this different stuff. And so I had a lot of questions, and I wasn't sure exactly what my life was going to look like. And this was before I fully went forward with this channel, Church of the Eternal Logos. And so we went to Joshua Tree. You had some shamaness. It was a woman that you knew, and it was like, oh, well, they got a ceremony, down here, you should go. And I went, and we can talk later about how that experience went and what we gathered from it. But that was the last time I ever did psychedelics, and I dove deeply into orthodoxy after that experience and never kind of turned back, and built this YouTube channel making content regularly, trying to kind of, the goal really when I founded this YouTube channel was to explain to obviously the general populace, but the intention was if I was explaining myself to all these friends I had, because all my friends were new age, psychedelic, spiritual, not religious, and now I'm talking about Orthodox Christianity and like changing my life, and nobody got it. Nobody understood why. How do those dots connect? And the initial goal of this YouTube channel was to show how, in my mind, they did connect, and how if you really believed all this stuff, it actually takes you towards the Orthodox Church. So, yeah, we can get into that a little bit, but
you need to trust the mushrooms, Patrick. The ayahuasca will give you the answers.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny too. You find out little things. What wasn't Seraphim Rose? He was under Alan Watts, like he studied under Alan Watts a little bit. Like
How crazy is that?
I know.
It's so crazy. So crazy. Yeah. No, and that's what I'm saying is like I was one of those guys. I remember when you came down and you're like, man, I'm really looking into this Orthodox thing. I was like, dude, this guy's like, I don't get that. But I had been struggling with Protestantism at that time. Like I kind of came back, looked at Catholicism, and I'm like, this isn't it. You know, and I saw someone else had commented that, you know, Catholicism was almost a roadblock for them finding Orthodoxy. You know, I mean, so, I mean, yeah, from there, I think we can kind of peel back a little bit to, that's how you and I met. You know, we did some ayahuasca together, and then you pulled a 180 and you're like, all right, dude, I'm gonna get rid of this channel. I can't make money off of it. I'm going to start this Church of Eternal Logos thing and go home and start grinding. It's like, all right, more power to you, bud. I'll keep. And I did, you know, that caused me to start inquiring. And I started at that point, I was down with the Peterson phenomenon. I started following some Pageau stuff, and I was definitely open to it. But I would say a lot of my, you know, kind of what we wanted to chat about in the spring is my upbringing definitely blocked me. You know, I'm kind of like, I thought I knew what that meant. And when you brought up theosis, I'm like, dude, this guy thinks we can be God. Like, this is so blasphemous. You know what I mean? Like, right. I get that. And I think part of, we have plenty of, I think we have, you've probably spoken about this, really good apologetics online. And I think the one area that might be a little bit underserved is not necessarily combating arguments, but like understanding where people are at. And I think that's where you and I'm like, hey, dude, I get it. I remember. How many of you still have your friend and you bring them to church, your inquirer, and they're like, I don't want to kiss the priest's hand. Oh, that's weird. You know,
every American when they first go to an Orthodox service, and I was the same way. I remember my first Orthodox liturgy I attended, and it was funny because one of the other PhD students, he was Orthodox, and he had contacted the priest at that parish to let him know I was coming, which I did not know that he did. So when I walked in, the priest turns to me and he goes, Patrick? And I was, what, dude?
That's clairvoyant.
And then he explained to me later that, you know, your friend contacted me, said that you were thinking about attending liturgy this Sunday, and I went, and I enjoyed the formalism of it. I thought it was beautiful. It was in a OCA Russian parish, so it was all in Russian. There was very little English. I think he redid the sermon in English, so he said it in Russian and then said it in English. But at the end there, and I met Father Josiah Trenum's son, and everybody was going up to kiss the priest's hand, and Father Josiah Trenum's son was asked by the priest, hey, he's new, show him around the church and take him to fellowship. So he walked back there and he's like, oh yeah, just get in line. We venerate the cross at the end. And I was looking, and I see people kiss the cross and they kiss the priest's hand, and I'm thinking, what the? And I was like, I don't want to kiss this man's hand. And I remember I did it just out of the pressure of the room that everybody was there. So I did it. And then we went to fellowship and hung out with Father Josiah Trenum's son, who was an undergraduate student. I think he was a freshman or sophomore at that time at Berkeley, and chatted and had a really good combo. And then after that, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. So I was a little bit more familiar with Orthodoxy, and then went to like Holy Virgin Cathedral there in San Francisco, where St. John of Shanghai's body is. And that's a fun. I mean, you want to stand there for 3.5 hours, but it's a phenomenal, beautiful liturgy. And then I just started to attend more services. And so I was kind of Protestant. I knew a lot about Orthodox theology because I took a PhD course on the history and theology of Orthodoxy. as a non-believer in the attempt to learn more about psychedelics and frescoes.
Mhm.
But the more I attended, the more I prayed, the more it just felt right. And then I felt like my life was falling apart. And that's what led to that ayahuasca ceremony. And then it really kind of, we'll explain later the details of it, but it just reassured me that I was on the right path and turning away from everything that I really was promoting. And I was making, $2,000+ a month just on ad revenue from all the psychedelic content. And after that ayahuasca experience, it's like I couldn't make it anymore. It just was it felt so hollow because I actually didn't believe in any of the stuff that I was promoting, but I was still making graphics to publish because that was my only form of income outside of a part-time job I had there at the university at the registrar's office. So yeah, wild stuff. And I remember telling you, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna go home, and because my mother got diagnosed with an illness, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take my savings. I had my life savings, which wasn't very much, and I was like, I'm gonna leave California, and I'm gonna devote my life to trying to build this YouTube channel as an outlet for my academic work. And yeah, I remember you're like, why don't you just rebrand your psychedelic channel?
Yeah.
I'm like, I just feel like I need to create something new.
Yeah. And isn't it weird, when you talk about, there's some people who say orthodoxy's America's best kept secret, like you're a religious studies major in San Francisco, and probably, and I don't know about you, like I'd never heard of the preservation of relics, and specifically someone like St. John. I think I told you, I was baptized, and then 6 months later I went up there and I was like, yeah, this is cool. Some, not to blaspheme, some dead guys over there. And then like, now I'm at a Rocoy Paris. I'm like, holy cow, like that is a significant thing.
Right.
And you know what I mean? Like at first I'm like, yeah, it's his body. Is it really uncorrupt? Da, da, da. But again, I think that mindset of growing up and kissing the hands and all that was just very much, but I don't know, like, when did you first hear about, we can peel things back. When did you first hear about Orthodoxy? Like growing up at all, you're Methodist, or how did that, you can kind of give me your beginning. Like, when did you find out?
So I had, again, as a religious, I knew about Orthodoxy. I didn't know the theology. I didn't know the history. I didn't know much about Byzantium or anything like that. But at the time, my girlfriend was Ukrainian. And so I knew that they went to Orthodox churches for Christmas and Pascha. And I knew some of the rituals that they participated. And that was the only times that that ex went.
And was that's when you met her? Did you know about when you were a kid? Like,
I mean, no, not as a kid. I didn't know anything about it, but as a, after, undergrad and master's, I knew of what Eastern Orthodoxy was, like a very basic rudimentary level. But even when you study religion, when you get into early Christianity, I mean, it's so hyper Western focused that you learn much more about the history of Catholicism than anything about the Greek East. And so the reason why I even learned, and I've said it multiple times, why I took a course on the history and theology of the Orthodox Church was because of a paper that I wrote based on the research of the Psychedelic Gospels, this book, which talks about these mushroom frescoes in Western Europe, which at the time, obviously, I was very interested in psychedelics and I was making money promoting it. And I believe that psychedelics were the leading edge of whatever the religious spiritual phenomenon is. And so if you want to know, the nitty gritty, go take, your 5 grams in silent darkness. And there was a book by R. Gordon Wasson and his wife, Valentina Pavlovna, Russia, History and Mushrooms. And it is talking about the historical relationship Slavic peoples have had to mushrooms. And again, R. Gordon Wasson, J.P. Morgan, backed probably by the intelligence agencies promoting psychedelics. His article in 1957 talking about Maria Sabina, the Mazatec shamaness in Mexico, and her taking mushrooms and healing people and taking people on these visionary journeys with her little spirit helpers, these elf-like creatures. That was like a huge point in psychedelic history, was 1957, because when that article came out in Life magazine, that was kind of the first time the secular Western American public was really exposed to the sort of spiritual use of inebriate substances and contacting entities and gaining insightful knowledge, all this different stuff. Well, his book with his wife talked about all the different words that Slavic languages have for mushrooms, and described Slavic languages as mushroom philic, whereas English and German is mushroom phobic. There's only like a few words we have to describe a mushrooms, fungus, and toadstools in English, at least. So we have 3 words to describe a large genre of a species. You know, there's all types of mushrooms. Where in Slavic languages, they have hundreds of words, over 100 words to describe different mushrooms. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, after doing the research on this book, I knew about orthodoxy, I knew about iconography, and I was like, I bet I'll find more mushroom frescoes diving into like learning more about Russian orthodoxy because of their Slavic history and their relationship to mushrooms. And so I took this PhD course on theology and history, and that's when I definitely didn't find any mushrooms, but I learned a lot about logos and church history and theology. And so that kind of really reshaped my understanding of Christianity. Christianity was basically like something that I had no interest in becoming again. But after I took that semester course on the theology and history of the Orthodox Church, I saw how erudite, how deep, how philosophical and theological the church was in its understanding of logos and the person of Christ and this cosmic mystery. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And that caused me to look for stuff online. And that's when I actually found Jay Dyer. After that semester, I found Jay Dyer talking about, I think it was God, logos, and numbers or something like that. And it connected with everything that I had been reading, because I was reading tons of theology in that course. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I think he mentioned the Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ by St. Maximus the Confessor. Bought that book, read it, and I was like, man, if I was going to be religious, which I thought, being religious is sort of antiquated, nobody in the 21st century really knows what's going on, is going to be religious. Meanwhile, again, my PhD's in religious studies. I thought, but if I was, this Christian concept of logos is really interesting, especially the Orthodox framework. And then that eventually led to me going to services, becoming more interested. And then I took an LSD session, if you will, by myself in my apartment, which I do not, again, for anybody listening to the conversation, we do not promote the use of psychedelics whatsoever. The goal of this video series and today's stream, we're just talking about our experiences and really our failures that eventually, through God's grace, brought us to the church. But I did like a high dose LSD trip alone with my dog in my apartment, and I just came to this realization that all these things that I liked about psychedelic spirituality, like fractal mathematics and sacred geometry and sacred space and cymatics, and we're all one and all this different stuff. And I, within this, again, inebriated high, came to the realization, well, oh, that's what Christianity has, the philosophical, theological presupposition and the foundations for all these things actually be real. Because if me as a psychedelic person, I was realizing I can't really justify, to use those philosophical terms, I really can't justify all these things that I really love in my worldview, because my worldview is actually relativistic. And so realizing that my worldview ultimately was relativistic and I can't make truth claims, I was like, okay, I think this is the way. And then,
yeah, how do you break that down for your normie? Because what's so funny about your story, and mine is similar. Like, you don't have to go to Berkeley to get a PhD and do an LSD trip and study mushrooms and Slavic to come into Orthodoxy.
right?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's
no,
weird.
You don't. I recommend you not do any of that.
But you get what I'm saying? Is like, how do we? What is it? And wanting to peel things back, what is it that finally clicked from you there that the Patrick at 10 years old, 15 years old in Southern Indiana said, like, no way, right? So what were your first conceptualizations of Christianity, and what was the bridge that all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, like this was correct, or this was just interpreted or told to me wrong? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we can start from the beginning. I know that's what we were planning on. We have a few super chats, so let's address those real quick, just because I wanted these streams to be a little bit more engaging. So if anybody has comments or questions while we're going through, we'll pull those up as we go through the stream so that you guys can make comments while we're talking about it. And just want to give a shout out to Back in My Right Mind 88. Throws in $10. Shout out to Colleen. She says, Patrick, I also have an icon from Union of All Icons. It's beautiful and great quality. It really is, guys. The icons, Alexandria Union's icons, Union of All Icons, very, very beautiful and great quality. I highly recommend you guys getting them. Shout out to Alexandria. So thank you so much, Colleen, for that. Really appreciate the support. And over here on YouTube, Lawrence John throws in 50 NOK and says, much respect to you, brothers. Keep bringing people to the faith from a Romanian Orthodox living in Norway. Well, God bless you, Lawrence John. Really appreciate you. And we got a new COTEL crew member, Turquoise. And really appreciate you, man. Thanks for becoming a COTEL crew member. And shout out to our sister, Candace Spence. Candace, would love to catch up with you. Haven't chatted in a while. Hope school's going well. And she also became a COTEL crew member. Thank you so much, Candace. God bless you, sister. Hope everything is well with you. And let me just check over on the Dono chat. Okay, so we're up to speed. So, guys, if you have any comments or questions as we move through today, feel free to send in. Maybe you have a similar story. Feel free to send any questions or comments in, and we'll read those as we go through. So, okay, so beginning from the start here in regards to our spiritual journeys. So I grew up in a fairly conservative Methodist household. And so church, I remember going to church when I was a little kid. Like, we always went to church on Sunday, and it was, again, more of a conservative Methodist parish. And my grandmother was a very devout Christian woman, my dad's mother, and her family comes, and my dad's line comes from a series of men that were Protestant ministers. Many of them had THDs, which is like a theological PhD. And Methodism was a very important dimension to our family identity. My great-grandfather founded a Methodist camp in Iowa on a big lake called Okoboji. Anybody who's from Northwest Iowa or Iowa, the state of Iowa, or southern Minnesota is going to be familiar with that. But he founded a Methodist camp there and built a cottage, of which my family still has. And so going to the Methodist church, that was just normal. I remember, getting confirmed at like age 12. You go through confirmation. Now you're a rational entity and you're fully Christian now. And it wasn't until in high school, I remember in my senior year, I was really into like Joel Osteen. So my grandmother on my mom's side, she would memorize all of Joel Osteen's jokes. So if you've ever watched, and I haven't watched Joel Osteen in years, but he begins his little sermons with like an opening joke. And my grandmother, she was hilarious, but she would memorize so many jokes. And whenever we'd go see her, she'd have a whole list of jokes that she had. So I remember I would sit with her and we would watch Joel Osteen sometimes during high school. And I was like, during my senior year, I remember specifically during basketball season, which I was playing varsity basketball with the goal to go to college and, play collegiate basketball. That is like, I wanted to devote my life to Christ. And I remember buying his book and reading some books like that. Well, eventually I go to college after high school. It's a small school in northern Indiana called Manchester. It's Manchester University. Now it was Manchester College. And was on the basketball team. And that was around the same time in which I really got into smoking marijuana. And yeah, don't recommend to anybody. I'm only sharing my life lessons with everyone. Story. Yeah. And the Manchester College was, for being Indiana and being a small D3 private school, was very liberal. And I remember that was my first exposure to transgenders, because down in my dorm room, which was an all male dorm room on the level, and then second level was like women, and then third level I think was men again. But on the third level where the men stay, there was a guy who wore heels and he was kind of overweight. He presented himself as a woman. We all knew he was a dude. It was clear. And I was like, gosh, what a bunch of weird people. And that was my first exposure to that. And I realized I didn't want to do the basketball thing. And I had right before the season started, I had a heart murmur, which led to me having to get cleared before I could play for that season. And I've never had a heart problem or heart issue. And so I eventually got cleared. I had to go to like Wabash Hospital, and they did all these scans and eventually said, okay, it's a little bit of a murmur, but you're good to play sports. But I had missed because I wasn't able to participate in anything because of the murmur for like a month and a half, almost 2 months. And so I didn't really feel like I was part of the team, and really didn't have a desire to kind of do the whole college basketball thing. So I decided I didn't want to play basketball, and I quit. And that led to me then moving to a different school because there's no reason to pay the expensive tuition for a small private college when I wasn't going to play sports. So I moved back to live with my parents and went to Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, my undergraduate school, which is here in Indianapolis. It's now I think they've divvied it up, but it used to be a joint university of an IU degree. And then if you did STEM, you'd get a Purdue degree. So all degrees were essentially an IU, Indiana University degree from Bloomington. But if you did STEM, it was from Purdue. So it was a great little gig because you could live in Indianapolis and you could then get a degree of one of these major institutes here in Indiana. And I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do because I was no longer playing sports for the first time in my life. And I remember I took a class on the Bible because I thought, okay, I'm coming back home. I want to get right with God again. I want to learn more about Christianity. So I took this elective on the Bible, which was written by or not written, but led by a scholar who was sort of the higher criticism. And so I learned about Gilgamesh. I learned about the multiple author theoryship of the Gospels. I learned all this different stuff, which totally shook this naive foundation I had from my Protestant upbringing. And that really kind of ruined Christianity for me. Because once after taking
class, right? So one class, and I want to pull you back. So your grandfather was a Methodist teacher or a preacher, or your great grandfather?
Yes, great grandfather was he had a THD, and he was a big time like Methodist minister here in Indiana.
And so Methodist, it's a kind of a branch off Calvinist, right? It's not Reformed. It's more high church, or what's? Tell me a little bit.
It's mainline Protestantism, so kind of like Presbyterians or stuff like that. And Methodist,
so I'm a dummy Catholic. I've been to Lutheran. I've been to kind of Reform, and I've been to non-dom. What do you tell someone? What's different between Methodists and other? Like, are they into predestination, or what's kind of what did you learn growing up that when you went to that Bible class you weren't ready for? I guess
that Scripture and the Bible stories, from my perspective at that point, weren't what I thought they were growing up. So. Which is ironic because now I do have more of a biblically based worldview, and I do believe that John wrote the Gospel of John and all this different. But when I took that course, because I was learning about all the higher criticism, it totally undermined what I thought to be the Word of God in the Bible. So what it really did was not so much about any sort of specific theological dimension or Arianism, Christology or eschatology. It was more that, oh shit, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and like we did a whole day on comparing the Epic of Gilgamesh versus the Noah story. And then the point was for our teacher, he highlighted all the similarities and then made the argument that Gilgamesh came first and that this story was clearly a retelling of that by the ancient Israelites. And I was like, man, I guess the Bible's not what I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
So that was huge. In regards to Methodism, it was founded by John Wesley. So he was an Anglican. And and I don't promote Protestantism at all, but out of the different Protestant denominations, Methodism tried to have some resemblance to an ancient faith. So they have like the doctrine of sanctification, which is not theosis, but John Wesley was reading like St. Macarius and some of these patristic fathers of the East and tried to incorporate elements of that into a sort of new Protestant Anglican faith. And
did you know that growing up? Like, did you
no,
know substitutional atonement? Did you know,
no.
like, you went to church on Sunday? This is kind of, you know, one of the highlights of, I think, most people growing up in Western society is that you don't have any form of apologetics. You go, you know, I'm highlighting, look, you're, you know, great grandson of a Protestant preacher, teacher, whatever. You go to church every Sunday, and I have, you know, similar stories on my end. You take one Bible class and you're cooked.
Yeah.
Right. You can't argue. You're not smart enough at 20 years old. And this just really shows what the education system does. Like, your whole belief system was completely smashed in like 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, that should tell Western society something about and like, this is one of the big things when I was listening to Father Josiah Trenham, and he was Presbyterian. He's like, I knew that this belief system was going to be destroyed. His is by, you know, the alphabet soup Skittles stuff. Right. That was one of the things that when I was exploring kind of Protestantism, I listened to him, and he goes, I knew within 20 years that the Skittles were going to take over the church. And that's honestly, you know, what's happening. And so we can see the product of this Western intellect, this, you know, not to rip too much, but obviously you look at polls and who votes for what. It's like middle. And I get this all the time in California. Like, I meet a lot of people, and I'm curious if this was your experience. I met a lot of Midwest Southern people who are like, oh, I hated my hometown. I was, I don't want to say abused, but they make excuses about how hard their life was. Like, oh, I had a nuclear family that was together, and they forced me to go to church on Sunday. I had to get away from the brainwashing, and that's why I'm in Encinitas now doing all these psychedelics. You know what I mean? Like, it's that. And like, you had the most privileged upbringing, and now you're marching for people who are more or less privileged. And it's just like, how do we not, it takes, you know, 10 years to rip out of that when you look at your experience and my experience. And it's funny how just one linchpin, you know, one part of my story is I had a friend that you know, he went to the public school. I went to the Catholic school, but he was in church every Sunday with his mom. Him and his brother, his dad didn't go, which, you know, statistically, you know, men, you need to go to church.
Yeah. We'll mention that statistic. So
I don't know what is the stats, like 90.
From my understanding, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I'll give a quick, you know, recapitulating of what the study showed was that children who grew up in a family in which the father attended church regularly, it was like in the high 60s to low 70 percentile, retained the faith of their father into adulthood. Or children who grew up in a household where the mother went to church and the father did not, it dropped to like 20 to 30% would retain the faith of their childhood. So it demonstrated that if the father attended whatever Christian service, that they retained their original childhood faith at a much higher degree.
Yeah, I found this is just from 1996. It's called, and again, I know it's from Catholicism, so hopefully it's not too bad. But it showed 72% when moms and dad go to church together. 72% will, and we'll look. I have some other stats on that. 55% when dad goes, 15%, 15 when mom. So you're 3 times more likely to stay going to church when your dad goes to church.
Right.
So, you know, that statistically, my dad converted from Reform to Catholicism at my first communion, which again was a blessing. But it was funny, that friend of mine went to church, and he went to, you know, I went to the Catholic school. So I was there 5 days a week. We had religion classes, and he went to SIU Carbondale. So we're both 19. I went, and, you know, we'll get into my story, but I went down to visit him like 2 months into school. And I was like, hey, dude, we going to church tomorrow? He's like, no, I'm not going to church. I was like, wait, what? Like, dude, we've been going to church since like kindergarten. He goes, nah, dude, I'm not. Christianity's BS. You know, like, this is a guy that like I saw at church like 2 months before going to college. In like 2 months, I'm like, what happened? He goes, you know, my roommate, and he was in the dorms. He's like, my roommate asked me, he came up to me, and his roommate's atheist. And he goes, oh, you're religious? You've read all these religious books? You do me a favor. I've read your book. You read my one book, and then we'll talk. And he read, it was either The Selfish Gene or The God Delusion. I don't remember which one.
Okay.
And then
Richard
he's like,
Dawkins,
Yeah, he read a Dawkins book and he went atheist like that. And I'm like, dude, you're gonna go to hell, you know. And I was still. What's funny is Catholicism. I still think a lot of, you know, after Vatican II, have a lot of Protestant presuppositions, like whether or not they would say substitutional atonement. Like that was kind of, if you pressed me, that was kind of my idea of what salvation was. Okay, we're all sinful. God kills himself, and then we can believe in that and go to heaven, you know, versus kind of the idea of theosis. And I tell you, you know, you think I would really know the Catholic, what's the beatific vision? What's the Catholic technical catechesis idea of salvation? Do you know?
Oh yeah, the beatific vision in regards to, I mean, that describes their
Heaven.
experience in eternity. So
Yeah.
they stare at sort of beatific vision of God. They don't peer on God directly.
But the Catholics, they don't embrace theosis, or did they? And
They have a form of sanctification, but because they don't have the energy essence distinction, it doesn't really work. So how theosis, again, that's why orthodoxy, you know, people in the West lament that we don't have a sort of structured linear theology where, you know, you can just find out how, oh, well, what's this belief and what's this belief. I mean, we in a way we do, but everything connects together, and so we have to have the energy essence distinction to understand theosis. Theosis informs Christology. Christology informs anthropology. All these things are interconnected. And so because the lack of an energy essence distinction in the West, how exactly do you become deified by the grace of God?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big problem. And that's where it gets into the analogia entis, which in Jay is, I believe Jay is the best apologist when it comes to Catholicism and Protestantism for orthodoxy. I mean, bar none. His knowledge of all the Catholic stuff, I think, is just phenomenal. So he would be able to speak to that much more eloquently and accurately than I can. But the point, and I would say, so yeah, Catholicism has a doctrine of sanctification, but how do you become sanctified? They don't have the energy essence distinction, so it's not a direct relationship with the deity.
Yeah. And this is where, you know, I remember you introduced the idea of theosis to me, it was first off-putting, but then it made 100% sense to me. I'm like, okay, this is a divine act of healing, right? And coming from a naturopathic doctor perspective, it's funny. I use that example with my naturopathic friends. I'm like, yeah, Protestantism's kind of like the MD that gives you a pill. You don't have to do anything. I'm the doctor. Here's your pill. Like, you're good. You're saved. Versus like, no, you're eating bad. We need to stop this passion that's leading you to eat bad. This is making you sick. And that was actually one of my first confessions that I had as an Orthodox. I remember, you know, confessing the same sin over and over. And I still had kind of a legalistic mind. And I'm like, Father, I'm confessing the same sins. Like, is God going to forgive me? And he's like, Michael, God forgives you every time. But the wages of sin are death. He's like, you're killing yourself. You know, ultimately, you are enslaving yourself to these passions and they're divorcing you from God.
Right.
Which, you know, from the Western intellect, I'm like, whoa, never thought about it that way. Because even in Catholicism, at least me being raised, like you hear, oh, okay, Jesus died for your sins. I'm like, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? Like, unless you have the full view of theosis, you get stuck in the idea of substitutional atonement. And me growing up, that was my major issue. I had my hometown. We have Lutherans and Reformed. And I've told you this story 10 times or whatever at this point where, you know, I'm 9. You know, I'm born, raised Catholic. Very pious parents. My mom says the rosary every night. Grandparents are Polish, rosary every night, Catholic. My dad's side was Reformed, but still, like, my aunt's in the choir. They cut the grass. My grandma went to church every Sunday. My dad was, you know, like churchgoers. Like, I'm so blessed with my upbringing and to have Christ in their life and to have those influences. You know, I was in church, you know, Holy Days obligation, pray every morning and evening, more so in the evening. My mom taught me, you know, would pray with me. But being like 10, I'm over at my friend who's Reformed. And I told you, I was like, hey, it's 6 o'clock on a Saturday night. I got to go home because I got to eat and go to church in the morning. He's like, well, you got to go to church. I was like, because it's the commandment. Like, this is, what do you mean? Like, you gather, like, what do you talk? He's like, no, you don't have to do that. I was like, what do you mean I don't have to do that? I was like, dude, you're saved by the blood of Christ Jesus. You're already saved. You believe in Christ? I'm like, yeah, you're good. You don't have to do that. So let's go play. And this is what I'm saying is, like, you don't understand how a lot of the Protestants, their own theology ends up destroying themselves. Like, do you realize when you tell that to that kid and that kid goes around the community, whether or not as a Protestant you would argue, well, that's just not, he just didn't understand it. It was like, it's still kind of like a virus of an idea that sprouts off of the faith. It's a heresy. And then it ends up infecting everyone around them.
Right.
And, you know, my hometown has 3,000 people in it. So, you know, as a Catholic too, we shared we had my school had like 140 kids in it. So I had 10 kids in my class. Okay. So I was, you know, slow boy and small. I had lots of attention. You can't tell. It was very helpful. But then like our baseball team was with the Lutherans. And so we would get into it about Mary, you know, we'd get into it about the saints. And so like I had a decent idea of apologetics at a younger age, but it was very, very rudimentary, very like, well, Jesus's first miracle was by his mom. Right. I mean, that was kind of the basis of like venerating the saints. And, but even coming to Orthodoxy, the first time, like, Holy Theotokos, save us. I'm like, you know, like I can venerate a saint, but she's not saving us. And then I think Father Josiah Trinum has a really good video on like, you know, the saints do save us, just like the doctor saves you in surgery. You know, it's God's energies, right, coming through the doctor. And you don't tell the firefighter who goes into your house and saves your baby, oh, God did that. That wasn't you. Like, I'm not thanking you. I'm not being grateful for you and saying, oh, thank you for saving no, God saved them, not you.
Well, it's both. Yeah.
You know?
Both and.
Yeah. But you get like it in exactly that, both and. You don't get that growing up in the West. It's 1 + 1 is 2, right? It's black or white. There's really kind of there's no difference in all of that. Right. So did you have any experience growing up to Catholicism or to atheism or any other, like you went to church on Sunday, you never argued with anyone? Or
yeah, never went to another type of church. Went on mission trips when I was a kid. So this is like middle school. I was when I was in middle school and like later elementary, sports and skateboarding was like my life. So I remember we went to like Roanoke, Virginia for a mission trip and like helped poverty stricken people. Like my mission was to help paint and work on a woman's house that was really poor. Her house was falling apart and it needed painting, stuff on the roof. And so we worked with like grown men, and then the young kids would do whatever they were allowed to do to help.
Why were you doing those things? Like, was someone like you're a good person?
No, I mean, I would consider myself a Protestant believer. I mean, it wasn't like my life was oriented around the church like it is now as an Orthodox Christian, but you know, that's what people did. And then all my friends were going, and we all took our skateboards, and you know, it was exciting to go to a new skate park in Roanoke, Virginia. And so we would work all day. We'd go to the worship service and sing all the songs and pray and get into Bible discussions with the youth minister who took all the kids for the mission trip. And then in our free time, we'd go skateboard somewhere. And we kind of had in my church at that time, we had so many young guys that were into skateboarding. We kind of had like a Christian skateboard group. And so for the youth group, they'd actually take us to different skate parks around Indiana and stuff like that. So that was just what we did. We were Christian kids. We didn't do drugs. We weren't really interested in any of that stuff. We liked skateboarding and watching, you know, skateboard videos and going to skate parks and doing stuff like that. So I went on the mission trip because that's what everybody did. And yeah, I felt good about it. And I enjoyed going to the worship services and singing, you know, Hillsong didn't exist yet, but it's that style of worship, you know, and you're in a big amphitheater with people from all over the US, other young kids. And that's what we did. So it was good experiences. And we would go, you know, every year go to the places for, you know, the homeless people here in Indianapolis and serve meals on Thanksgiving and like leading up to Christmas. That was something just what the youth group did. And I did that every year. So I didn't really think about it.
Yeah. So you didn't like sit down and like learn the solas or like this is church history.
No,
like
not at all.
You're just like, hey, I'm a Christian. I believe in Christ. I go to church on Sunday. I'm saved. You know, Christ calls us to do good works. The Bible says how. So like, you know, your church comes together and goes, hey guys, we're going to go build this thing. You're like, cool. I get to go to the skate park. We're going to help people out. Everything's going to be good. And so was that like teenage years or I assume at that point?
Yeah, that was middle school. I can't remember exactly. I'd probably say somewhere around 7th to 8th grade.
So in grade school, for me, right, I'm Catholic, I'm going to a Catholic grade school. We learned about, even at my Catholic grade school, and this was in the 90s, evolution, science change. Science changes, climate change. Were you not exposed to, many things then that kind of, really challenged your faith at all, or?
Rough Hands knows exactly what I was talking about. He says living that 411 life. 411 was a VHS skateboard tape that we would watch. Absolutely. We watched the new flip videos, the new birdhouse videos. Yeah. Rough Hand knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Tony Hawk.
Lord says skateboarding for God. That's kind of how we felt as kids. We viewed ourselves, we weren't great or anything, but we kind of viewed ourselves as like a Christian skateboard group. Yeah, Ruffian says, bro, I lived it. Yeah. And we got a quick super chat. I want to give a special shout out to both. Ann throws in $10 and says, this is highly relatable. Thanks. I grew up attending OPC, fell away, then came to Catholicism thanks to my Mexican mother, and am now, after 2020, pursuing Orthodoxy. Well, glory to God, both. And
Amen.
really, really hope that you can continue that path and come into the church. Our Serbian brother apologized for the Cyrillic. I'm not going to be able to read any of that, but he says, top of the morning to you. Top of the morning to you, brother. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Apologize. Can't read all the Cyrillic. I do see the initials of Jesus Christ, but thank you so much, brother. Really appreciate that. Anyways, you were talking about your childhood. And
well, I'd asked you, as you're kind of, growing up Methodist, you didn't look, like climate change. I don't know about you, right? But I was getting taught that stuff in grade school. CO2 is going to destroy the planet in the next 5 years.
At your Catholic school?
Yeah, we had it in our thing, and it was kind of one of those difficult things, like creation is, the Bible says this is all the earth is. The Big Bang says it's. I think at that point, the Big Bang said the universe was 1 billion or 3 billion, and now it's 6, and then it moved to 12, or I don't even know what their theory is anymore. But you didn't have any of that, or even people who were saying, well, Jesus, historically didn't exist. You didn't have that, like grade school, high school?
Not a whole lot. Not really. Again, where I grew up in Indiana, it was pretty conservative. You had people that didn't go to church, but it wasn't ever like debating apologetics or refuting the existence of Christ or anything like that. It really wasn't until I got to college till that was presented to me, and I found it very, very convincing. And that led into actually me studying world religions was the consequence of that original Bible class. Because when I left that small school from playing basketball, Manchester, and went to IUPUI, I didn't know what the hell my major was going to be. At the time when I was playing sports, it was like pre-physical therapy, athletic trainer. I was like, I'll just stay around sports. I'll learn how to tape ankles. I already know these people, I'll learn how to do that. And then I'm leaving, and it's like, well, I'm no longer playing sports. So what the hell am I going to do? And I was still like pre-physical therapy or something like that when I transferred. And so I took all these mandatory classes and a few electives, and I wasn't convinced that that's what I wanted to do. But so after that Bible, the next semester, I was really interested. It's kind of funny. Some people are going to know Jeff Corwin. He was the animal guy. So there's Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. And then there was Jeff Corwin, and he had a show on Animal Planet where he would go around different parts of the world and teach people about animals. And that second semester at IUPUI, I was like, man, if I was going to choose a career, I'd love to just be around animals and study animals. So I decided I was going to become a biology major. And I remember my mother, because I graduated high school with a 2.6 GPA. And my parents always wanted me to my mom, not so much my dad, like to read books. I didn't want to read anything. I wanted to go play sports. And so when I said, yeah, I'm going to change my major to biology, I remember she was like really worried. Like, are you sure you want to do that? That's going to be a lot of work. You didn't really apply yourself in high school. And I took the like bio 101 class and got an A. And then some of the other students, they were like pre-med students, and I was getting better results on our tests than they were. And it was the first time in my life I really applied myself to like learning and doing well in education. And because of my enamoration with Jeff Corwin, I thought, you know what, I want to study animals. I'm going to be a zoologist. That's what I'm going to do. And so it all started when, and really, actually, let me back up before the zoology stuff. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was watching this guy on YouTube who had a bunch of border collies. I mentioned this in my stream on the theology of dogs. Do all dogs go to heaven? And I was watching this guy, and he had 3 border collies playing frisbee. They did all these cool tricks, and I was like, man, that'd be cool. And this was early YouTube days, so this is like 2009. And I thought, I'm gonna go adopt a dog and train a dog. And so I went and adopted a dog, a pit bull, actually, which wasn't the first choice. I thought I was going to get like a collie of some sort, but I ended up getting a pit bull. And within like 3 months, I had him super well trained, you know, reading Cesar Millan, Leader of the Pack, learning how dog psychology. Yeah. Yeah. And seeing that, oh, wow, all this stuff works. Like I just adopted this 1.5-year full grown pit bull with no training. And within 3 or 4 months, he's incredibly well trained and can do everything. And I was like, well, being a dog trainer is kind of a low bar. Because I thought I was genuinely, that first semester when I transferred, I was genuinely thinking about dropping out of college and just getting a certificate to be a dog trainer. And well, after I got my dog, and I was like, okay, that's a little bit of a low bar. Maybe I want to study like apex terrestrial animals. So, you know, like lions and, you know, apex species. And so I was doing the biology thing and was really doing well in all my science courses. And that gave me like a new identity, a new confidence, and that basically I can take my work ethic for sports and apply that towards books and be just as successful. And so that led to me taking another course that second semester. So why I can transfer or change my major to biology, I took a course on an introduction to world religions. And that's when I learned about Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Taoism, Confucianism, Shintoism, and then, of course, the Abrahamic faiths and paganism, shamanism. And I was like, oh, wow, this Eastern stuff is very interesting. And so I took that course, really loved it, and took another course on religion that third semester and loved that one as well. I think that one was specifically on Hinduism or Buddhism or something like that, and decided I'm going to get a minor in religious studies. So I was a biology major with a minor in religious studies and kept doing my biology stuff. At that point, I was kind of like an atheist for a semester. And then with the Eastern mysticism stuff, I was like, okay, maybe I'm just, you know, interested in Eastern mysticism and that type of thing.
Did you stop going to church? Were you praying still? So you
totally stopped going to church. So thought like Christianity was kind of dumb and backwards. You know, people don't know anything about, you know, again, the higher criticism of scripture, and then that all these, you know, American Christians and stuff, they're just lost. They don't know as much as I know about it. And it was a very prideful disposition I had towards Christianity.
When that happened, did some of your other conservative values, were they kind of attacked too? You know, at that point, you know, like I was really raised pro-life. Like at Catholic school, we would write letters to girls who were having a hard time. We'd say, hey, this is Michael. I'm a kid at St. Anne's School, and I know that you're thinking about aborting this baby, but, you know, I want to let you know God loves that baby. God loves you. So, but I would say by the time I was, you know, after high school, we did debates in high school a lot, like government class and social studies. But I would say by my first year of school, you know, college, these things were not that important to me. You know what I mean? So I was like, yeah, if someone wants to have an abortion, whatever. You know what I mean? Like for me, it not only was Christianity falling apart, but everything else kind of was going with it. Does that make sense? You know, or you just...
I would say at that point in college, I didn't view myself as having quote unquote conservative values or politics. It was during, it it was during the end of the Bush presidency, and I was in college, so it's like very common to criticize, George Bush and the Republicans and the war and Iraq and everything that happened that was going on. And then Obama was becoming president. When was that? 2010? When? 2008.
I think it was the first time he won. He reelected in 12.
Yeah, and reelect. I remember I was in a history class when he was reelected in 12, and everybody was super ecstatic and excited. And I just wasn't really into politics per se. So I remember, I believed in climate change. Again, it was the biology. I just viewed myself as like, well, I'm interested in science. So whatever I was taught in my science courses and biology courses, microbio, orgochem, all this different stuff, it's like, well, that's the way the world works. And everybody else is, they're just, my parents are backwards. They just don't know. And I remember at that point I was living with my parents. And so I would, kind of argue with my parents about their worldview and stuff like that. And it was just naive. It's what kids do, And so I was like, I just viewed myself as so much more intelligent than them.
Is it, or is that a product of our system? You think 100 years ago, were 19-year-olds arguing with their dad about, hey, dad, you believe this? Like, don't you know that's made up? He's a mushroom, dad. I read John Allegro or whatever, right? Isn't that Jesus was a mushroom, dad? Like, you're so dumb. You go to church every week. You don't realize how manipulated you are. And not only that, but it's also sad because that's what I'm saying too. The teaching and then the schools, and you're surrounded by it. Like when I was in high school, it was the same thing that, I was raised in the Catholic school. We had some infiltration of those ideas, but by the time I got to high school, everyone was all science and, oh yeah, you do that Catholic thing. Number one, not only did I have it from the Protestants, oh, you guys have it wrong because you venerate saints and you think that your works earn you into heaven, but also, don't you know about climate change? Like, don't you know Jesus was just made up? And so I'm like, I kind of just like, I won't say that I went down the rabbit hole. I was just kind of, it's funny because at that time I just didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, but it influenced me. I'd say by late high school, I definitely was like, I don't know. Like, there's so much fishiness going on here with this climate change and evolution. And was Jesus a real person? Like, I don't know. Well, and why do I, 2000 years ago, how can I know what was going on? And how can God judge me on that? I remember thinking, I even took Peter as my confirmation name, right? So as a Catholic, you get confirmed in 7th or 8th grade. And I picked Peter because I wanted to be a leader. And it's a good name for me, to be honest, because I betrayed Christ and ultimately came back. But you know what I mean? It's just one of those things where I was like, if Christianity is real and I get to the pearly gates and Peter's is there, I'll be like, well, I wasn't around. You saw Christ crucified. How am I supposed to have faith 2,000 years later? Am I supposed to have that same faith in George Bush? Am I supposed to have that same faith in medicine and my doctor? Like, how does this game work? And, I went to my priest at the time and I'm like, so Jesus died for my sins. Okay. There's a turtle in West Africa 300 years ago that could play the flute. Okay. What does that have to do with my appendicitis right now? What does this guy who claimed to be God 2,000 years ago have anything to do with me? Like, there's no chain. And especially, I'd argue, and I don't mean to throw too much shade, but the Protestant stuff really messed with me probably more than anything. Coming in, it's like, it was a huge, number one, there was a gap from what I knew into Catholicism.
Well, why don't you speak to, like, when did that transfer happen between your Catholic faith to atheism to Protestantism?
Yeah, I think it slowly just kind of fell apart. Even in Catholic grade school, our priest would come over, once a week, and we could ask him questions. We had religion classes, and our religion classes, I would still argue, like, now that I know what I know, it seemed very Protestant. And, this is after Vatican II. I hardly knew about Vatican II. What was weird is because we had this one family that came that, what do you call them? Seta Advent? Not that.
Sedevacantist?
Yeah, not because they believe the Pope isn't
legitimate,
right?
Right.
I forget what they call people who didn't accept Vatican II. They have, I think, a word for them too, some type of traditional Catholics. But you know, this family came that was homeschooled, and this kid's name was Matt, and he had like 6 siblings, which was kind of weird. The mom was veiled, and they went up and they stuck their tongue out, right? And I'm like, whoa, what the heck is this stuff? This is super weird. And but that again, it threw another wrench in my whole idea of Catholicism. I'm like, so wait a minute. Why are these people taking the Eucharist on their tongue? Why is she wearing a veil and we're not wearing a veil? Like, which one is, you know, quote unquote, right? And so there was just like a lot of confusion, and none of those things were explained properly. So when I go to my priest and I say, Jesus died for my sins, I need you to make sense of this, right? I just came from science class. Can you make sense of this for me? Because this does not make sense to me at all. And I never really found good apologetics. And maybe I should have went to, you know, I should have probably sought it out more than just asking my friends or asking my, you know, even my priest at that time. But, and it's funny because I had that was probably like my number one question when I kind of fell away. I remember being 20, 21, sitting down with my Lutheran friends, having a beer. And at that point I was kind of new age agnostic. And I'm like, Jesus died for my sins. Make that. Well, I don't, there's like, they literally like, I don't know. Just, you have to believe. You just have to, like, I'm like, tell me, if you can just give me a reason why Jesus died for my sins, I'll believe. But you're not making any sense, dude. You just have to believe and go to church, Michael. And I could see them. I'm like, this just doesn't seem right.
Right.
Like, you need, like, there's no way that for 2,000 years, this idea has stayed alive. Because that was probably what was always in the back of my mind. I'm like, how did this, if it's a trick, how did this trick stay alive for 2,000 years? They had to have been people who were smarter than me. But ultimately, I fell into your mindset. I'm like, wow, I'm just smarter than everyone that ever existed. Like, I just, you know what I mean? Like, how, but there was still a level. I'm like, that's so dumb. But you go to college, and then, dude, I had college professors that, oh man, I could go down just a plethora of the ideas and things that they said, and then tacking that on top of social issues. You're like, you're really dumb, and you're teaching my class. I'm like, the whole world is just full of dumb people. And again, I think that I was somewhat humbled to be like, I'm dumb, but everyone else is dumber. You know what I mean?
Right.
The Terrence McKenna had this quote about, like, there's like 2 realities. One is there's the Illuminati, the dark forces that are controlling and manipulating, you know, every single thing, and no matter what you do, you'll never beat them. Or the opposite end, that we're a bunch of idiots and we are having to vote between Trump and Biden because that's how dumb we are. You know what I mean? It's like, both that idea kind of shook me. I'm like, wow, it's almost relieving to know that there would be Illuminati, because if we're that dumb that this is the system that we've created, it's pretty flawed. And that's kind of before I got into the Peterson stuff, that he actually, I think, kind of leveled me out, being like, hey, look, society's not that bad. Like, we got medicine, I got antibiotics, I can live a long time, I got air conditioning. But there was definitely an unfolding. And like you're saying, you know, I think, and I wonder what it was like 20, 30 years, you know, maybe in the 70s and 80s, how much, I don't want to say argumentative stuff there was. Like, did you guys have in high school, did you guys have debates over marijuana, abortion, gay marriage?
None that I was a participant in or remember.
See, we had that. We literally, I remember, because I was.
Well, you went to a Catholic school though. I was in public school.
Well, this is high school.
Oh, okay.
And you know, the other thing that's really weird about where I'm from, my hometown has 3,000 people, and it's the biggest town in the county. And so, like, in my town of Nashville, there's a Lutheran school, there's a Catholic school, and the public school. And then we have like 5 or 6 other, we call them feeder schools, like towns of 500 to 600, and they all come to the high school. So there is a bit of a melting pot that, you know, there's one of the small towns had a Lutheran school, and one was another, like, I don't remember if it was some other form of Protestant. So you get to high school, there's definitely like a level of different ideas. And again, we're all small white town, very conservative people, but there's definitely, you know, a difference of opinions. And yeah, we had, like, you know, gay marriage, debates. We had marijuana debates. We had taking away the elderly's drive, the ability to drive debate. Like we had all kinds of like kind of weird things. And, you definitely get exposed to some ideas. Like I'd assume I don't know about that point, but in your 20s, like marijuana, okay, it's cool. It's better than alcohol. But you don't have the apologetics. And I think definitely the internet definitely opened a lot of people's eyes to nuance in the ideas, and then research, and then history. So it just kind of all unfolded for me. And I ended up in a similar place to you, that I was eventually kind of like agnostic, atheist. I'm like, I don't know. The whole Jesus thing is fishy for me. This whole died for my sins. Did he exist? These things don't match up for me. I loved history though. And yeah, I just kind of drank beer, and I was in community college. I was going to go play football somewhere. Again, it's strange how similar our series. I moved to Chicago. I'm there for a couple of weeks. I was going to play football. Kind of lost my zest for it. And then I moved back home, went to a community college for a year. I'm 19. I'm going to class, working at Kroger and farming, and then drinking beer on the weekend, and not really worried about these things. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I still went to church on Sunday, I think, at that point. At 20, I go to a school called SIU Edwardsville, away from my family. And I wanted to be a history major. And that's where, my first history class is, hey, we appreciate your opinion, but you're a privileged white male. So you don't know what it's like to come from a place of oppression. So your opinion is your viewpoint is not as valid as this person of color. And I'm like, wait, what? You get like, it was just a plethora of all these weird ideas that are hitting me. I'm falling away from Christianity. I'm going to college. I'm thinking I'm smarter than my parents and the generations before me. But then the colleges are also telling me that. Like, what, what I mean? It's just a very, I think, confusing time. And you start to realize that's probably what they want, is just smoke and mirrors. And that's what I'm saying, kind of like with the series. I think a lot of people like you, like me, I've heard this over and over again. People are like, I didn't know what to think. Right? You go from like, I'm going to play basketball, physical therapist. No, I'm going to be a zoologist. No, I'm going to train dogs. You know what? I'm going to go study Buddhism. Like how unrooted it all really is, and how confusing it just smacks a lot of people around.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, and that was kind of what I told you. It makes sense that people fall away from Christianity. And then you get into this whole idea that they're just trying to, they literally, that's part of what they're trying to do, is drag you away from your family, put you in university, brainwash you, and confuse you.
Right.
Or indoctrinate you into these dumb ideas, and then put you out in the world and to vote for the destruction of society. Like, I don't know about you. That was, after college, I started looking, I'm like, wow, college produced a lot of really dumb people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's sad. And I don't really mean that in a judgmental, mean way. I'm just trying to look at the fruits of what it's done, and ultimately corrupted a lot of different ways. And I'm not here to specifically I was Catholic, probably whatever, but it wasn't until Orthodoxy that a lot of these things really made sense. And I could see the enemy for who and what he was at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, I was, you can kind of flip back over to your end, right? So you're biology major, you get into Eastern mysticism, and you're like, I'm going to China, or that's
yeah, basically. I mean, I had this newfound confidence in my intellectual capabilities because I finally applied myself for the first time in my life in my undergrad. So I started to take those religion courses. Then I thought, oh, I'm going to be a double major. So I became a double major in biology and religious studies. Look at me. And then I started to compete in Taekwondo in like 2010. And I was very interested in Bruce Lee and the history of martial arts and Chinese Kung Fu and Tai Chi. And I was studying Tai Chi along with Taekwondo. And Taekwondo is a Korean martial art. It's really not that applicable to like street fighting or anything like that. It's a lot of like kicks, flashy kicks, jump kicks, that type of thing. But love martial arts. And so that was like my new spirituality now. I was a scientific biology guy competing in martial arts and really interested in like the Eastern stuff. And Christianity was a deep afterthought, like never really even considered it. And 2010 was also, so that martial arts period was where, again, I was interested, had a bad relationship with marijuana throughout my 20s. So did that basically every day, was smoking weed. And I was getting into Terrence McKenna. So in 2010 was when Alan Watts, Terrence McKenna, that stuff really came onto my radar. And I was, consuming everything I could on the internet. And I thought, you know what? Listening to Alan Watts, I'm going to go to China. I'm going to learn Chinese. And so now defunct, I think they've been banned in many parts of the United States, but the university had what was called the Confucius Institute. And these Confucius Institutes were these little institutes that were placed at universities all across the United States that were funded by the CCP to the goal, what their public goal was, to educate Westerners about Chinese culture. And so I think they've been now defunct because various teachers and stuff at these institutes were being paid by the CCP and all this different stuff. Anyways, it's closed down. It doesn't exist anymore at the university, but at the time it did. And I remember I went in there because I was at towards the middle half of my dual degree in religious studies and biology, and I could take, and I already took like the mathematics courses, but I needed to take like a higher calculus course and like Orgo 2 or something like that with the lab, or I could do like 2 years of language. And I was thinking it was for the BS versus the BA degree. And so I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to get a BA instead of a BS. And I went into that institute and I was thinking, well, what language would I want to learn? I was like, well, I want to go to Asia. I want to go see, the Tai Chi Taoist monks on the Wudong Mountain. And I went in there. I was like, so how hard is Chinese? And of course, they're there to sell you to try to learn Chinese. Like, oh, it's not that hard once you get the hang of it. And I was like, all right, I'm in. So I went to my, your advisor or whatnot and scheduled
guidance.
Your guidance
counselor who is there like 4 hours a week and makes like $70K a year to be like, well, I don't know what fits your schedule better. Do you want to take, history of East Asia, or do you want to talk about microbiomes of out? It's like, don't even get me started on that.
Right. So I scheduled for that next semester. So that next year, which would have been 2011, to study Chinese language, Mandarin Chinese, and simplified characters. So there's traditional characters simplified, and went there, was studying Chinese. I remember that first semester, just the first few weeks into the semester learning Chinese, they're like, oh yeah, and we have the study abroad program that in the summer we go to our sister school, which is Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou. And any of the students that are taking Chinese, you guys can, as long as your grades are good enough, you can qualify for a scholarship that the CCP pays for half of your trip.
Did you know much about like communism and stuff? Like, it's funny because you go like, yeah, the CCP is paying for me to go.
They just said the Chinese government, but yeah, it was the CCP. I mean, at that time, I was early 20s. It's like, oh, I can get half of my trip to go to China for, over a month. Do a whole summer semester at a university there and travel. It's like, I don't care who's paying for it. Yeah. Half of it's paid for. So,
but do you get what I'm saying? Like right now, if a kid reached out to you and says, hey, DPH, like the CCP is going to pay for my thing, would you be like, I don't know if I would trust the CCP to do anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just funny how, looking at what we're talking about, it's like the Chinese government was coming over here and paying for you to do. Like, how do you know what I mean? Like, how obvious is it now? I'd be like, whoa, dude.
Right. And that's partly, and on the trip, we knew that because the Chinese government knew where we were in China throughout the entire trip, and they would show us different things. And so they're always showing us the best features of Chinese culture, obviously, right? Because the point was to garner Western support of young college kids towards China and the Chinese government. So anyways, I'll get more into the Chinese trip and story. We had a super chat. One of our brothers, Luke from St. Barnabas, throws in $5. We know Luke. We actually had a nice little night with Luke down in where were we? In Irvine, and we went to the restaurant there across from your apartment back in the day.
Yeah, we went to the Mexican spot there. And I think Luke came over. Father Deacon was down there, right? We went over to his old stomping grounds too.
Yep. So shout out to Luke. He throws in $5. Says Dr. Mo and David, hope you guys are well. And
yeah,
thank
I
you,
need to
Luke.
pop in
God
there.
bless you, brother. Hope you're well.
Yeah, I need to tell Father Michael hi and everyone down there at the church. It's been a while since I need to pop back in there. That's where I was baptized. Someone asked me, I'm not in because I'm not in California anymore. I'm up in Meridian, which is just outside Boise.
And Adamisk Arson throws in 2 super chats. And he says, at age 19, while doing psychedelics, I got a transhumanism tattoo. Even then, I saw the idea as scary but inevitable. Now this idea is mainstream and I hate the tat. Should I get it covered up with the cross or wear it as a reminder of my sin? Lord, have mercy on me. And he followed up by saying, more info about the transhumanist tattoo. It's the only one I have, and I don't ever want to get any more, which is why I consider leaving it alone. When I was young, I was sick with diabetes, and though tech could save us, or thought, he said, and thought tech could save us from the future, now I know the truth. Glory to God. Well, Adamisk Arson, ultimately your decision. I know that tattoo removal is pretty good nowadays compared to the way it used to be. You could get it removed if it's doable to do a cross. I know it, as Orthodox, we don't really advise people to get tattoos, although, it's your own decision. A lot of people have come to the faith and they're covered in tattoos. Actually, most of my friends have tattoos.
Yeah.
It's actually more rare nowadays to be a young guy with no tattoos. I see this at the gym. When I go to the gym, I'm one of the few guys there that have no tattoos on my body. But anyways, I digress. I think not having tattoos is the new tattoo. But Adamisk Arson, if you can remove it, I think that's a good idea if possible. If you want to cover it up with something that's more Christian, I would recommend you just talk to your priest about it and see what they recommend. Your priest would give you better spiritual advice than me or Dr. Mo could. So anyways, that kind of catches us up on any of these super chats. So let's get back to what I was saying with
who's the babe in the chat?
Who is the babe in the chat? Oh, Jenny Han, Jenny Harry, soon to be my fiance, says, I'm so glad that Patrick have no tattoos. I really like that. Shout out to my fiance. Love you, Jenny. Look forward. She'll be here soon. We'll be married here very soon. So anyways, this whole Chinese thing. So I took the Chinese class, knew about the study abroad, and applied for it right away. And I think later in that winter semester, I got the approval that I got the scholarship. The CCP is going to pay for half the trip. And I was super stoked, super excited. It was my first time, leaving the country. Mm-hmm. It was my first time, really, other than my trip to that small college, leaving my parents, leaving my family, leaving my friends. And I will say, and this is something that my parents have always noted, is that even as a kid, I was always very willing to go do things by myself or do novel things, travel to different places. Like when I was playing sports, I remember my dad always would comment that how willing I was to go travel somewhere, to go try out for an AAU team or play for something. He's like, so that kind of spirit carried on. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to China. And, I went there and, I had a blast, had a lot of fun, realized that Chinese culture was not the naive representation I had in my mind. When I went to China, I was thinking of, again, that sort of traditional Chinese martial arts aesthetic. And it wasn't that at all. It was, big lights, big buildings, millions of people in hundreds of different cities. And the people were very capitalistic. So one of the things I noted when I was talking with some of the Chinese students is I was like learning about Chinese history and love Chinese philosophy and Taoism. And they didn't really care for any of that. They were interested in like making money, businesses, having nice things. And so it kind of opened my eyes that, okay, so average Chinese culture isn't really interested in the ancient history and all this different stuff. They're interested in making money. They're interested in businesses. They're interested in basically a lot of the Western pursuits. So
how this trip, you get a scholarship. Are there other Americans? And then you went there to learn Mandarin. And so I'm just curious, like, you went to school, you learned Chinese culture stuff. Were these like business people, or what was that environment like?
Yeah, so you get it's a study abroad program at the university, and you take courses on Chinese language and culture, and you have to pass the final exam for that semester to get credit for that summer semester.
Okay.
So you go with like 30 other students, or maybe it was 20, somewhere between 20 and 30 students from IUPUI that signed up for this program. Everybody had to have some, whether it's a semester or 2 semesters, at least of Chinese, and had to have a passing grade to apply for this trip. So I go there with everybody and had a really fun time. I mean, it was exhilarating to be on your own, traveling around China, and knew that Chinese culture wasn't exactly what I wanted in regards to, when I went there, I was thinking about, oh, well, I'll just be I'll study PhD in religious studies, not focus on Eastern mysticism and stuff like that. And like I said, in 2010, I was already getting into McKenna and Alan Watts. By 2011, I think I had already done in psychedelics before I went on that trip. So probably in the spring of 2011 or something like that, before that summer semester. And was pretty rooted in this sort of Eastern mysticism, New Age spirituality. I ended up going on another trip the following year in 2012. At that point, I had 2 full years of Mandarin Chinese, had already done a study abroad trip. And so my Chinese, not great now. So I know a little bit of Chinese, but my Chinese is terrible, is what I said. So the second trip was a lot of fun because we were able to break away from the group, and me and another guy, Lawrence, who's actually a British expat who lived in the United States and actually served in the U.S. military, and he was deployed, I believe, in Iraq. He and another guy were former military, and so they were older, and they were now like freshmen at college, although they were like like adult men, and they went on the trip. And so me and Lawrence, the trip, you study for a full summer semester at the university, and then for a week you go to Xi'an, which is the ancient capital of China, and then you take a trip to Beijing. And those are like 20-hour train rides, by the way. Oof. So I had already done the trip to Xi'an and Beijing, and so what we wanted to do was just take a train by ourselves from Guangzhou, which is southern China, up to Beijing in northern China, while the rest of the group went to Xi'an. So we spent 5 days by ourselves in China, and I remember we were totally dependent on my language skills because Lawrence had 1 semester, and he's there because he's just trying to have fun,
Yeah.
And he's like an adult man. And so me, I know all the language. So it's just, I had to speak for us and do everything. And that was wild because I remember on that train ride, we realized that it was just up to us. We didn't have any of the Chinese tutors or the teachers to speak for us or ask, somebody. So I had to figure it out myself one way or another. And you don't exactly have, smartphone, Google Translate then.
Yeah.
So this is, 2012, and you're in China. So all you have is like a little digital, like Nokia phone that is not a smartphone whatsoever. You can, you have to use T9 to text, and you only have so much data you can use before you have to go buy a new card. So that was amazing. And I remember getting to Beijing. We had no plans for anything. We didn't know where we were going to stay. We had money, but we didn't know.
Well, hold on. So CCP, you got your 20 people. You have a curriculum. Are you learning, like you're going to these temples and learning Taekwondo, or what do you? Sounds like you're just getting blitzed the whole time and hanging out and partying. Like
pretty much. Yeah. Chinese like to drink. And so, so it was just so much fun because you could just go eat street food, and the Chinese street food was amazing. It was very, very good in the Chinese restaurants. And so, no, there was no martial arts whatsoever.
Your idea going over there's like, I'm going to learn Mandarin, I'm going to go study Eastern mysticism, and you're like, dude, we're going to party and eat street food? Like it's kind of like college. Like, let's be
the
honest.
second trip was very different than the first one because I already lost my naive understanding of what it was like, and I was doing the same trip again the next year. So I knew where everything was. I knew which restaurants, around the university to go to. The people would remember me the following year. So the second one was really just about having fun. Because I wasn't under this pretense that I was wanting to be a scholar of Eastern mystical traditions or something like that. In fact, I thought maybe I was going to do neuroscience. So before that second trip, or right after it, I did an internship at the Neuroscience Center, and I realized neuroscience is kind of boring and didn't really want to do that either. But the second trip to China, like when on that trip with Lawrence going to Beijing, we get there and I just have this little phone, this little SIM card phone. And I remember I was able to get my phone call out of China and figured out how to call somebody in the United States. And I called my mom. We just got out of the train station in Beijing. And I told her where I was. And I said, Mom, can you tell us where the closest hotel is? Because we have no idea where anything is. And we're just by ourselves. And she was kind of freaking out. She couldn't believe it. And
you were what, 21, 2 or 20?
Yeah. So what would I have been? 23.
Okay.
Yeah. And she said, I think there's one pretty close. It's like about a block and a half away. It's like, okay, thanks. And so we went and got KFC. Anybody who's been to China knows KFC is huge. And Bruce Lee he's wearing that yellow suit from, I forget which movie it is, the one that has Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in it.
Yeah.
And he's in front of every KFC. And so we go get some KFC and then we find the hotel. And luckily it was more of an upscale hotel for Western people. So they all spoke English and stuff like this. We get there, able to get coffee, hang out. And then it was like me and Lawrence could just take the train and go wherever we want and just, explore Beijing. And we would go to the Wudao district, which is there's two major universities in Beijing. And so they're right next to each other. So this is called the international district because they have so many international students. And so we would over there and like find beer gardens or, at night go to clubs, try to meet international people from France or Germany or the Netherlands, or go to a hostel just to see who's in there. And then say, hey, what are you guys up to? And then we would all go out together. So it was tons of fun. But anyways, getting back to the focus of the stream here.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So it's kind of like you're seeking this Eastern mysticism. You basically go to New York and China. There's no like, there's no Buddhist monks walking around like, oh, my son, welcome to China. You will learn ancient mystery. You know what I mean? Like,
no.
You're like, no, it's basically New York. Everyone's trying to make money. Everyone's partying. But were you able to kind of like, sounds like you traveled quite a bit. You were able to go out and try and at least find those, like a Buddhist temple. Did you go to a Buddhist temple? Like, it's just not there. No one cares, No,
nobody really cared about that stuff. That first trip I did, I went to some temples and saw people doing actual monastics, maybe doing Tai Chi or something like that. But it's really few and far between in China. I mean, that is not the average Chinese culture. So the second trip was really just about, I know where everything's at. I'm going to have as much fun as possible because this is probably the last time I'll ever go to China. And so anyways, that was
spiritually pretty fruitless. You're like, you hit a wall. You're like, hey, wow, Bible's BS. Let me go study Eastern mysticism, China. Get to China. China's like, dude, this is New York, but everyone speaks Chinese, basically. And you're like, I got to reevaluate. I'm going to go be a neurosurgeon.
Well, neuroscience. So
Okay.
I was interested in what is it? David Newberg. He's a neuroscientist that had a book on like the neuroscience of God and stuff like this. I was interested in that stuff. I was really interested in where religion and neuroscience connected because I was still really interested in religion. But at this point, I was aware of like Gnosticism. I was aware of the Nag Hammadi. I was interested in psychedelics. I was deeply into like New Age, Eastern mystical worldview. And so when I came back from that second trip, it was time for me to now finish my last year of college and decide what exactly I'm going to do. And I decided I really like the religion stuff. And the more I did the Terence McKenna worldview of Hermeticism and Gnosticism. That just resonated the most with me related to psychedelics. So I was like, I'm going to go get a master's degree and I'm going to focus on like early Christianity. So like Gnosticism and Hermeticism, or at that point, and psychedelic shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got accepted to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and went there after my undergrad to study those topics. And I thought, it was, again, exciting. I was able to study the things I wanted. They had a Native American scholar there, so I studied shamanism with him and focused on psychedelic or inebriating forms, intoxicating forms of shamanism. And then they had an early Christian scholar who I focused on learning. Again, I wasn't very good, but learning Koine Greek and reading like the Gospels and learning about the Gnostic traditions. Like, so he was one of the few scholars in the country that had like a whole course on the Gospel of Thomas and like some of these Gnostic Gospels and stuff. And I don't even know what exactly his faith was. I think he was a type of Christian, but certainly not Orthodox or Catholic or something like that. But enjoyed my 2 years at the University of Illinois. And I knew, so I made that decision after China that I really didn't want to get a graduate degree in science. I wanted to do it in religion. And I didn't really know what type of job I was going to get. I just assumed I was going to be a professor. I was just going to keep going and gain my expertise and become a professor. And during the time at Illinois when I created that other YouTube channel, Fractal Universe. And so I created that YouTube channel to promote psychedelics. And that was in 2015. So by 2015, I thought, oh, well, looking what's going on YouTube, I'm going to create videos promoting the ideas that I believe in from Timothy Leary, McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, Watts, whoever it may be. Jason Silva was really becoming at that time. And so was creating all that content, and it started really take off. And I was like, oh, this is my ticket. I'm going to use YouTube and I'm going to be able to promote psychedelics and be a university professor. And so then it was time to graduate there. And I would absolutely characterize my worldview as like a cultic, psychedelic, new age. I was very interested in theories of magic. And that was my capstone project in undergrad. So the capstone, your final big project to get your undergrad degree was, for me, theories of magic. And so I looked at all the major theorists of religion, like Max Weber and the book The Golden Bough, Durkheim, Emil Durkheim, James George Fraser wrote the Golden Bough, and looking at their theories of magic. And then writing a paper on what magic was. Because I actually, by the time I was a senior in undergrad, I believed magic was real. I was taking psychedelics, and I thought, this is the mystery right here, guys. This is, psychedelics and ritual magic. Like, this is what it's all about. And so created that YouTube channel in 2015. And in the end of 15 into 16, I graduated. And it was time to go do a PhD somewhere because I knew I wanted to be a professor. And I thought, so my initial project, I mentioned this before, was the way I got accepted was asking to study, or saying I had a study project on how people who identified as being spiritual but not religious appropriated religious symbols. So like, why specific types of Buddhas, why the Ganesha, why these symbols. And so my initial project that I got accepted for was to look at people who identified as spiritual, not religious, and then look at the most common symbols or motifs or religious figures that they use and discuss why it is that they appropriate those particular symbols. And I didn't get accepted into it. Go ahead.
What was your social life and your connection to American culture? I want to take you back to Illinois, right? So this is like 2014,
15. Yeah.
Was that kind of on the back burner? Were you talking? Because I think one of our first, I can't believe it was that late. Maybe it was like 2019. We did one on, Jesus as a shaman. Right. What was that like for you? Like being, and I've been up to Champaign. I partied up there at U of I. When you're exploring these things, like, were there plenty of other people around you? Were you going down? At that point, I was kind of into David Icke in kind of the the conspiracy 9/11 stuff, where was that at all contributing to your journey, or you're like, that's smoke and mirrors, the deep state they're using, Rothschilds, Federal Reserve banking, was that on
that was
radar?
on the radar? Because during the senior year of my undergrad, I really got into Jordan Maxwell.
Okay. Yep.
I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Maxwell and the whole like study of astrotheology and like the deciphering of symbols and words. This is where it's like, well, Israel is Isis, Ra, and El. This whole thing, this is related to like astrotheology, which again, once I got older, I realized, well, all that stuff is shit because you're doing this whole thing in English. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But anyways,
yeah.
So I was aware of a lot of the conspiracy theories about what was going on. I would consider myself leftist at that point. So when it regards to like American culture, I was super pro psychedelics, super pro open-mindedness, very explicitly interested in magic and the occult. And I viewed myself as left of center. So when it wasn't until I went to Berkeley that I realized that I was actually deeply conservative in many ways, because I was always in the Midwest. So in the Midwest,
you poop in the bathroom, right? Not on the street. You're like,
yeah. So in the Midwest, it's like, oh yeah, you're kind of that guy that's kind of out there and you have all these ideas people haven't heard of. And then you go to California and everybody knows about those ideas. And then you're like, oh, well, no, men can't give birth. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. So it wasn't until I got to California where everything kind of came to light in regards to my foundational values. But that year after and this is where the psychedelics like take you into a delusional state. And I wasn't fully aware of it yet. I had lots of different substances I was able to partake in. And I remember right when I was getting ready to graduate from my master's program, I did a DMT session, smoked DMT in regards to, I wanted to know like what my next step was. And I had this vision. I was convinced that I was going to get accepted to the University of Chicago, which is sort of the preeminent Department of Religious Studies. It's the first religious studies department, academic religious studies department in the United States. And it's still considered in the top 5 in the world. So I was like, I'm going to get accepted there. And so I only applied to one school, the most difficult school to get into. And it was the University of Chicago. And I didn't do my due diligence. And this was all because I had this euphoric psychedelic experience where everything was going to fall into place. Right. And of course it didn't happen. So that was one of the first things that really shook me, that these noetic insights, these Satori experiences on drugs don't actually translate to real life necessarily. Where I was totally in the belief that you get into these altered states, you acquire gnosis, knowledge about the world, knowledge about the future, non-local information, and then you can come back into space and time and you can already put the pieces together, if you will. And it didn't happen. So I actually had to sell used cars and new cars at a Buick GMC dealership after getting my master's degree, because I made zero backup plans. I applied to one college and they said, no, thank you.
Sorry, like you're like, I smoked DMT and I ended up selling used cars.
Yeah, that's really what happened. That's really what happened. I kid you not.
Sorry.
No, that's literally what happened. And so I sold cars, saved up money, and then I applied the next year. So I was much more diligent in how I was going to go about applying for these PhD programs. And that's when I had that whole project on spiritual, not religious. And I got accepted to my university. And I was ecstatic because out of all the schools at that point that I would want to get accepted to, I got accepted to the one that I really, really wanted. It was the number one choice that I really wanted. So I was on cloud 9. And I remember going home after, I know I was at work. It was a late night selling cars. It was probably like 9:30. And I got an email with the confirmation that I got accepted. And I read it there sitting in one of the cars. And I just felt like my life was now finally beginning. Like I have it. And so went to, again, Berkeley, and that's when I talked about that first semester was the book on the psychedelic gospels. Then that led into the course on Orthodox theology and history, and then that led into the interest in Orthodoxy, and then I want you to catch up on your story, and then we can get into like how it actually led into becoming Orthodox.
Well, yeah, and I'm interested.
And before you start, we got a couple of super chats, so just real quick. I apologize.
Yeah.
Don't want to break up the rhythm here. Shout out to Luke Kindrat, our brother Luke Kindrat, sent in $5. Thank you so much, brother. He says, and God bless you, man. I hope seminary is going well. He said, not sure if my last super chat went through. Either way, good to see you both together. Currently crushing legs at the gym. Prayers up. Absolutely.
Salute.
So shout out to Luke. God bless you, brother. And I just did legs a couple days ago. Mine are still sore. And then General Milley throws in $3, says Wisconsin to China to Seattle, back to Wisconsin. I can relate. Yeah. So it sounds like General Milley had a similar experience. And then shout out to Alexandria, our Orthodox boomer grandmother. Go to uniofofalicons.com and get yourself an icon. She said, I need to introduce you to Father Elijah, the Western Rite ROCOR in Lodi, California. All Saints Orthodox Church. He was a Protestant missionary in China and met his wife there. He'd be a great interview. Yeah, I'd definitely be open to having a conversation with Father Elijah.
I think someone from my church just went and visited him.
Oh, really?
That sounds extremely familiar. I actually want to look it up.
And then somebody that we both know, shout out to the Orthodox Farm Chad. He says, the homie stream?
That's right. That's right. We're just trying to give me some goat milk over there.
That's right. Shout out to our Orthodox Farm Chad. God bless you and the family, brother. Look forward to reuniting with you sometime.
Yeah, you'll have to come up and visit sometime.
Well, once Jenny gets here, we'll take a trip out there for sure.
He'll get us some of that raw goat's milk he's got cooking out there.
Yeah. Okay, so catch up on your story from undergrad.
Ask you, right? So you do your trip, and at this point, we'll probably get into in another stream really breaking down more of the Eastern stuff, the psychedelics. But I'm interested when you do this trip, and you're like, oh yeah, I saw in my vision all these things that are going to happen and they didn't come to fruition. How did you kind of, I think in Orthodoxy, we can justify the prophets and you and Father Peter talked about that. Like a lot of the prophecies are meant for repentance.
Right.
Right. Like we can, I don't know how to say that in a way that it's like, it doesn't necessarily mean it comes true, but I think that's one of the biggest issues with psychedelics is in a lot of, how do I want to say that? Like, predictions of the future, like it didn't kind of crush your worldview that you're like, oh, wow, I did the thing. And I thought this was going to get me into this university. You're like, must be it. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, did that kind of hinder your worldview about the noetic realm and using psychedelics? Magic. It
certainly altered my belief in the insight that they gave, because I was convinced. Again, it was the dumbest thing. I remember my academic advisor at Illinois said, are you sure? I mean, all your other co-students, they're applying to like 10 plus schools. You're going to apply to one of the hardest schools to get into, and that's the only one you're going to, are you sure? And I was like, oh yeah, it's going to happen. I was just so convinced. And when it didn't happen, yeah, it shook my worldview pretty hard, but I was still convinced in the inside of psychedelics. Maybe it wasn't as concrete as I initially thought, but it wasn't until getting into Berkeley and then living there and doing my own psychedelics and trying to contact the little transforming machine elves. Because again, for those listening, for psychedelics for me wasn't a party drug. I really didn't do them often with other people. I would do high amounts by myself with the intention of like getting blitzed and having these enlightening Satori experiences where I connected dots. That's what I loved. And that's partly why now reading books is the way in which I fulfill that pleasure of like dot connecting, because I don't do psychedelics. I don't do drugs. So reading is now the only way that I can experience that. Much more laborious than just taking, 4 or 5 hits of LSD. But it wasn't until I got to Berkeley and then I had access to as many substances as I wanted, and I take them, and I kept trying to contact these entities and they didn't come. And I was like, man, there's got to be more to this. At one point, I remember it was probably like in my second year there, right before really starting to attend Orthodox services. I was like, this can't be it. This can't, I mean, what am I going to do? I'm just going to keep taking these substances the rest of my life. Like, that's my spirituality. And that was the point in which my faith in psychedelics leading towards personal enlightenment like fell apart. It was really falling apart. But that took, again, probably another 2 years after the DMT experience. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny though, we don't give I wouldn't use the word grace to certain in Western society, right? You don't give that certain kind of grace to Christianity, but you'll replay other broken systems over and over again. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the fruit of Western society and the destruction of the nuclear family and creating a utopia, you're like, let's just try harder. Let's try it different. But a lot of these people look at Christianity and throw it out, throw the baby out the bathwater instantly. And I told you, I don't know if the machine elves, I've told you a little bit. I'd like to talk more about that. Those are going to have to be like their own stream talking.
Yeah,
about,
we'll do another installment just on psychedelics.
Yeah. Taking me back when right. So I kind of told you I'm in junior college. I'm at home. I go to SIU Edwardsville. I want to be a history major. And I just got hit with woke stuff instantly. First thing through the door, you're a privileged white male. I took a whole class on the Crusades. We basically start with Urban calling the Crusades. We don't talk about, the Moors coming in through North Africa. We don't talk about, we kind of skimmed over Orthodoxy. Like you think at that point I'd have really understood. I remember, okay, Pope Urban, we go to Antioch and these mean white Christians, out of nowhere just decide to invade Jerusalem. Right. That's basically, this is 300-400 level history class. And, I kind of looked into other ideas of it but I didn't go down it enough to know what I know now, like Byzantium. My conceptualization of ancient Greece was probably still pagan. I didn't know when Islam happened. All these things just were not taught to me. And dude, I had to sign up. I remember those. I got to be careful I talk about this one. So I'm a history major and you have to take so many history classes. And I had one on the Crusades. I had Civil War, American Revolution.
Keep going, by the way. I can hear you. I just need to grab something.
Yeah. So it was funny because as a guy, again, you want to talk about guidance counselor, I had to take a history course and it was called Special Topics. And they wouldn't tell us what the course was about. You basically just had to sign up for it. And then on day one, you had to just show up and then take it. And I was like, hey, is there any other history courses? Like, no, you have to take one in Special Topics. So again, this is second semester of my sophomore year. And lo and behold, I go in the class and it was something on the age of Jim Crow law was the name of the class. And we had 35 people in this class on day one. By the end of the semester, there was 9 of us. It was run by a big, overweight, curly-haired Black woman. And the whole thing was just like critical race theory packed into history. And to give you one example, we had to read a book a week and then write a like 4 to 6 paper every week. That's a lot for an undergraduate, like 200 level course. And we got into it really hard over a lot of topics, about title. Is it Title IX? What's it where they have to hire so many people of different races?
Yeah, I believe it's Title IX.
And dude, like I remember this one white guy got into it with her because he got fired. He's like, hey, we had to lay off 3 people last quarter and I got laid off because I was white. What do you know what I mean? Like this was like the heat of all these things. And to give you one example, we read a book. I can't remember the name of the book. And I think, me, in all my classes, I was always happy to engage in dialogue. And man, the book was called like The Veil or something, and it talked about how African Americans have to act dumb in society because if they act intelligent, then white people hate them more or something. Like that was the premise of the book, and it went back and it talked about in post Civil War, or even in the South in the 1850s, 1860s, how Black people walked around with a veil. And she's like, who wants to start the discussion today? Let's talk about the book. And she goes, what is this veil? And I was like, well, it's the concept that African-American people in society would intentionally act ignorant around white people, because of fear of a competition of intelligence. And she's like, interesting word, ignorant. I was like, what? She's like, Black people are ignorant, huh? I was like, no, yeah. I mean, that's what the book. She's like, oh, so like ignorant as in like stupid? Is that what you're saying? And I'm like, is this happen? This is class. Like, I read your book, and I literally, like, there's like a snippet. I probably even used Spark Notes or whatever, to be honest. You know what I mean? And I basically kind of word for word said that or whatever, but I'm just giving you a generalization of like, this is what college was like for me. Like one class, it's supposed to be a history major. And ultimately you get into these things like, well, it was written by the victor. And then you have all this kind of woke stuff going on. And so I was in it long enough to be, and even on the Civil War, I remember talking about the Confederacy. And again, so we have Juneteenth next week. I don't know if most people know this, but I can even pull up the stats. And I argued this. I'm like, okay, so the idea behind Juneteenth is like, that's the last day that slaves in Texas heard they're free. And you probably know this. If you've studied the Civil War, right at the beginning of the war, there were 7 northern states that allowed slavery.
Right.
And when Abraham Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation, there was still 4 northern states that had slavery, and he only banned slavery in the South. And so when we're talking about this, I'm like, so wait a minute, the whole Civil War was fought over slavery, yet the North was allowed to have slaves? Like, were there smaller amounts? Yes. But if you go into it, you realize, hey, look, there's way more nuance to this, right? You want to talk about taxation and tariffs. I'd argue that was the vast majority of what was going on. And you can see this now with states' rights. And I still argue that's like, if Texas decided to secede tomorrow and Joe Biden took the American military in and attacked them, like that would not go over very well. But I did walk away with a view of history being very much manipulated. And not only that, but then modern people definitely put a spin on it. And no matter what you do, people are always going to have a different view of history. So I agree with that. But I just decided, I'm like, dude, I can't be a history teacher because I can't teach this. And especially if I'm going to be teaching things like, if I want to talk about the Civil War, and I'm not just going to say, hey, it's about slavery. It was a lot more nuanced than that. Was slavery a political issue at the time? Yeah, but I would argue that's not 100% of why the war was fought. Especially, like I said, until after the war, Delaware, Kentucky, and New Jersey still had slaves. So the war ended, and there's still slaves in the North. So that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And you can just basically go down most views of history and you find out that there's a lot of different angles. So I'm like, okay, I can't be a history major. And actually I'll have one other story. I took another class, and dude, it was as a teacher, I took, it was like teaching in diverse situations or studies or whatever. And those are a very popular documentary out there called like Waiting for Superman. And did you ever hear of No Child Left Behind?
Yeah.
So, right, basically what happens in Chicago is they give funding to schools that are doing well, and they take funding away from schools that aren't doing well based on studies on their test skills. And so, what ends up happening? You have a city of 5 schools, right? So this school is doing well. This school does terrible. They pull the funding. All these people, then the school gets shut down. They go to these 2 schools. And it just causes it as a discrepancy. And so you don't even have to be liberal or conservative to be like, wow, this is just not a good idea. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's like, and so this happened in Chicago, and the funding was then pulled. It actually increased the discrepancy between a good and a bad school.
Right.
Because the bad schools got shut down. Then they went to the next bad school and they shut that down, and all the tests. It was just a mess. But in my college town of Carbondale, they had 3 schools, and you basically kind of had like lower, middle, and upper class schools, you know, divided. And you could say racist. Like there were different schools that had different people of color at them, and they tested differently, and they got different amount of money from the state. So the school at the time, the city decided at the time, let's just get rid of the 3 different schools and then condense them into kindergarten through second grade through 6th grade, and junior high, right? So let's get rid of this. Well, what do you think happened? A group of people who had money decide to move outside of town, and then they started a new school, right? White flight or whatever you want to call it. And at the time, again, this is just like so picture perfect. I don't even know how to not say these things and not sound like I'm making up. I had a professor, and at this time I'm 23. She was 24, had her master's. She's a single white mom, female. And we had a discussion about this, right, in class. And it's literally me, like 14 white girls, 1 other white dude, 1 Asian dude, and 1 black chick. And what do you think? Like, obviously I'm like, she's like, well, I think that's just, degrading or whatever, using some derogatory terms for those people. And she's like, what would you do? I'm like, I would move out of town and send my kid to a better school if I could. Like, what do you mean? Like, she's like, no, I'm going to keep my daughter at this school here. I will, fight the system and the patriarchy and all this stuff. And I'm just like, what is this stuff? And you get like, I'm just arguing my whole way. Like I had to fight and choose my battles. Right. But I'm just giving people an idea that aren't in university. This was 2011, 2012, 10. This is not now. I can't even imagine, what those conversations are like now. But do you get how, like, I'm 23, she's 24, and we're arguing? I'm like, you don't know anything more. Like, but she
Right.
held, and she embodied all the very ideas of patriarchy in that class, being like, hey, you need to not talk to me that way, da 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 da. So I decide, hey, can't be a history major. I'm gonna switch to health ed. Which then again didn't take me long. You get into health ed, food guide pyramid. The vice president of Monsanto is running, Jeffrey Smith is in with Obama. And I grew up on a farm. And, I still love a lot of the Midwest people. And that's a whole other conversation about, my opinion, they got like herbicides and pesticides work, right? If you're on a farm and you need to increase your yield for corn, using pesticides and herbicides and GMO crop will increase that. And so you understand in the 70s, if let's just say it's me and you, and you're my friend, you're my farmer, and Monsanto comes to me and says, hey, you give this to your friends, it'll increase their yield, they'll make more money. Right. So I go to DPH and go, hey, your corn yielding, 80, 90 bushel an acre. If you use this stuff from Monsanto, you'll get up to 150, 160 bushel an acre. And if you're making $7 a bushel of corn, like you're doubling the money. And ultimately, though, then it basically gets entrenched. Like they own the code for the seed. You don't really even own the seed, right? You have to take it back to them. And at that time, I was similar to you. I was going to play football, and then I went to walk on at Carbondale, and then that didn't work out. I was going to play football, and ultimately, I got into bodybuilding, personal training. And I came down with interstitial cystitis. And so for people who don't know what that is, it's a kind of like an autoimmune condition of the bladder where I had like a chronic UTI infection. And I woke up one day and I had some discharge, and I'm like, oh, what is this? I go to an urgent care. They basically tell me, oh, you have an STD. At that time, I didn't think that's what it was. Like, we don't need to get into details of, I was in state college school. I wasn't the most Christian guy, but, I was doing my best to be safe. We'll just say that. So it didn't make sense to me. And it sucked because I just started seeing a girl at the time, and they're like, hey, you have an STD. My camera go away?
Oh, no, you're back.
So I felt dirty. I go in there, they give you, if anyone's ever had that happen, they just give you antibiotics, say you have it, do a blood test, send you home. I took the antibiotics. My symptoms went away. A couple of days later, they come back, and I call up the urgent care, and I'm like, hey, I have these symptoms again. They're like, oh, sorry, you don't have an STD. All your tests came back negative. And I was like, were you guys gonna tell me that, or was I just gonna walk around thinking, you know what I mean? Like, and again, it was so degrading. The nurse there was like, you need to be more careful. Like, don't you know this X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, I wasn't doing those things. Like, again, I was in state college. Like, but anyways, so I go back and they're like, oh, here's some more antibiotics. You have a UTI. Okay. Symptoms go away, come back. Call them up, go again. They're like, we don't know. We're going to send you a urologist. Here's more antibiotics. So give me more antibiotics. Takes me, a month to get to see the urologist. He's like, you have prostatitis. Here's another form of antibiotics. So then I take antibiotics for a month. Symptoms go away, come back. He goes, well, I don't know. You have another form of prostatitis. Here's more antibiotics. And I was on antibiotics for 3 months at that time. I got really sick. And then my symptoms came back. So this is over like 8 months to 9 months. And then I go back again, and he's like, we don't know what's going on. We're going to do a cystoscopy. Okay. So if you don't know what that is, they take a camera and they go up your urethra, right? Your penis hole, right? So they put me under, go up, look around, they scope me. I wake up and the doctor comes up to me and he goes, son, you have an improper lining of your bladder. We're going to give you more antibiotics. And you get like, I'm just out of this procedure. I'm like wonky. I'm like, I'm 22, 20. Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm on drugs because that's what, they put me under, or they just lightly sedated me. And at that point, I'm like, these guys have no idea what they're doing. They're just going to put me on antibiotics for the rest of my life. And, I'm going to have to deal with it. I worked at GNC at that time, and I had this woo-woo, like, vegan new age guy who was in herbs and all this stuff. And he's like, hey, dude, he kind of chatted with me. And I just went on bodybuilding.com in the forums, and I figured out, hey, looks like I have this thing called, interstitial cystitis. What do I need to do? Gluten-free, dairy-free. I fasted, juice fasted, hit the sauna, started work. And again, like, look, I'm 22. I'm boozing 4 or 5 nights a week. I'm eating Papa John's, going to the gym, partying, like not sleeping well. I cut all those things out, and I took a couple of herbs, fenugreek and milk thistle. If people know, those are really good for your liver and your kidney. And my symptoms went away. I was like, huh, like, my antibiotic. And again, maybe it was the last round of antibiotics, maybe. But I was like, man, maybe there's something to this, like, alternative natural health stuff. At that point, I had enough of the food guide pyramid. Like I went down the 9/11 conspiracy. I'm into the federal bank. I understand. Zeitgeist had come out at that point.
Right,
you remember that one? They did good on the federal bank. Obviously, the whole...
Yeah, the Christianity, Christ was Mithra and Horus and all that different stuff.
Yeah. But again, I didn't know any better, and I didn't Google, right? And again, someone, trust the science. Like at that point on YouTube or on Netflix, we had like Forks Over Knives. You had this whole I actually went vegan for like 2 weeks. Terrible. Don't recommend it. Will not recommend. 0 out of 5 stars. Maybe some church fathers can do that and saints, but I'm not them. So I'm like, okay, food guide pyramid's corrupt. Our medical care system is garbage. What do I do? And like you, I went back and forth. And what's funny is I actually took an ancient Greek philosophy class because I still really liked history. And my professor, I think his name is Dr. Alexander, was awesome. I loved it. We took ancient Greek philosophy, Heraclitus, Plato, Socrates. We did a whole like month on the Iliad, and he did the kind of like, hey, this is their Bible. Like this is their stories, and you extrapolate. Like Achilles was super prideful. Odysseus was prideful, but he still learned to use his mind and out, like, hey, you got to pick and choose your battles.
Right.
But that's when I learned what the Logos was. And I read Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Heraclitus and all that. But ultimately I was pretty lost. I didn't have faith in medicine. I didn't have faith in history. I had no faith in the university. I had no faith in the government. I had no faith in anything. And that's when the DMT came out, like Joe Rogan, David Icke. I listened to all of his series on The Lion Sleeps No More, the reptilians. And I had a Qigong guy in Southern Illinois come in, he was into Eastern mysticism and herbs. And
he's Qigong, yeah.
Yeah. And he came in and he put my hand out and was like, do you feel the energy? And I was like, yeah, dude, I feel it. He's like, yeah, that's Qi. And he'd come in and he'd start talking about astral projection and like, Tai Chi and all these kind of, different things. And so I kind of went full tilt, like new age. In astral projection, I was sunbathing. I was putting apple cider vinegar on my skin with peppermint oil, waking up and sun staring. Dude, I was down. I had every crystal. I would go out and supercharge it on the full moon. and I was really deep into astral projection because I had lost faith in everything. And I was like, I want to have a spiritual experience that I cannot deny. Right. I want to, and which is funny because it's not, I wanted to, I had a very rational, materialistic view. Right. I want to and this is the other thing is like, you meet someone who's like, I was on drugs or I was addicted to sex. And then Jesus came to me in a dream, and Jesus came to me and he healed me. And then I've never been the same. And I'm like, dude, I went to church 4 days a week, prayed the rosary, and like, I never had that happen to me. You know what I mean? Like these people, like you have these people who are saved and like they have these noetic, external, metaphysical experiences. I'm like, I want that. Like, why doesn't God give me like, and that's where I thought they were all done. I'm like, that's BS. You're just hallucinating. These are drugs or X, Y, and Z. But then you get into Graham Hancock, you get into Joe Rogan, the DMT rabbit hole, David Icke. I'm like, oh, dude, yeah, the reptilians, dude. This makes total sense. The Illuminati, that's what the Christians were talking about. And then I got into the stuff. They were called the Bringers of the Dawn, which is actually funny. It's actually almost like Mormon, the star seeds, the Pleiadians.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And again, it matches Christianity, like the fall of the angels, the incarnation, and all these different kind of wonky ideas, the ancient Greek gods, the ancient pagan gods. And I just went full tilt down that rabbit hole. And it's you've been down it. There's a lot to explore. Yeah. And if you're young and naive and you're seeking, I'd say ultimately I was seeking God. The Pleiadians, they're here, man. Our seeds. They're here. The Pleiadians, they're here. They got to defeat the reptilians. Man, I look back and it's like how cringe. But then, I was in circles with other people that were, there was other people that were drinking the Kool-Aid too. I know, and that's when I found your stuff. I'm like, this guy's on the Kool-Aid. Like, I'll reach out to this guy.
Right.
And then glory to God, I had to hit my head on a lot of those things. You realize, dude, I was deep in astrology. I had
when did you start using psychedelics?
So what's funny is the first guy I met at GNC was not into psychedelics, but he was into sun staring and meditation and all these things. And then I had another guy work there who was like full tilt, like was tripping on acid every weekend. And he's like, dude, this is how you talk to the aliens. And this, you want to talk? I was like, dude, I took acid. I was out camping. I fell back on the rocks and this aliens came down and they looked in my brain and they did. And again, I have this, I'm happy to talk about my own experience. And I'm like, dude, I want that. Like, that's what I want. I want to talk to the aliens because the aliens, they have the technology. They know what's really going on. You know what I mean? Like I was down that rabbit hole and you still see it. You still see people down that rabbit hole.
Yep.
But I think I'd smoked some, I'd been on weed. And would you guys get into K2?
I never got into that.
Oh, bro, I don't know what is in that stuff, but I could tell some funny stories. Me and my friends, we got into that. One night I was working late and I came home. I won't tell most of the story, but they put K2.
Yeah. Save a lot of the good ones for our other installment on psychedelics. I'll share.
Yeah, the hookah. This is just my friends being complete idiots. They put K2 in the hookah with regular weed and tobacco. And I came home, like 9 of them, dude. There was just like vomit pools everywhere. I guess they bonged, smoked this stuff, and then some of them went and snorted my pre-workout. It was so crazy, dude. I'm telling you, I came home. There was like people on the floor. They're throwing up. One dude locked himself in the kitchen. I had to go find my one friend. He was shirtless. He tried to fight like 4 guys at the bar. He came back at like 3:30 in the morning. And this is like December. It's like 14 degrees outside. But then my one friend, I remember being at the bar and he called me and he locked himself in my room. I come home from my work. They all did whatever, like this combination. And if you don't know about, K2 is like a synthetic. I don't even know. Yeah, I don't even know. I'd like to go back and look at its structural makeup, but it definitely, it's some form of psychedelic. And it's not like weed. It's way worse. I don't know if anyone smoked it. I think it's way
Did you ever smoke salvia?
No, but I've heard people say that K2 and salvia are similar. Like dude, it messes.
I never did that either.
Yeah.
I never did salvia or K2.
but like my friend, he locked myself. He's like, no, like I need to be left alone. The aliens are here. And I'm like, dude, you okay in there? What, you okay? He's like, yeah, dude, it's just like aliens and stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I wish the aliens would talk to me. But I'm just saying, like, it was funny because all of my friends, after I talked to them, and again, they weren't as like into what I was into either. They were just in it for recreation. Like I want to do these things because like I'm rubbing these crystals and like sun staring in the morning because I'm trying to enlighten and increase my chakras and become more spiritual, which, you know, ultimately is just fulfilling the ego at the end of the day. And again, you don't realize that. I didn't realize it at the time. You know, now that I look at it, yeah, spice is similar. Spice, K2, like, but what's funny, baths, I think too, some people confuse it with bath salts. I don't even think people know. Spice, K2, bath salts. And I think they're kind of interchangeable, but in Illinois, you can buy them, but it was sold as incense. It's like the same thing. Like they sell these peptides for research purposes only. People inject themselves with them, but you could go and buy them. I think my friends, they had to drive like 2 hours up to like, you know, by Champaign. We're like 2 hours away. And like on Friday night, my friend's like, yeah, we're driving up to, you know, Odin or wherever. It's like a really small gas station in the middle of nowhere. That they would drive 2 hours to get this fake weed and, you know, smoke it out of a Coke can after 4 beers or whatever. But I wasn't in it for that. I was in it because I was lost spiritually, but right. I could feel that there was God. I still kind of prayed, you know, like I still kind of believed in, like, I don't want to say I was Jew, but I believed in God the Father. I'm like, dude, something I think created this universe, and I think it can like probably hear me. Like if it was, you know, it's like a video game. I'm like, dude, I think they see and know what's going on. Whether or not it's benevolent, you know, by now I'd say by definition, whatever God is benevolent. Like that, whoever, you know, it's like that's by definition good. It created all things. But at that time, I can't say I had a worldview like that. So playing with all these other, and that's why, again, they were just another tool in my toolbox, whether it was crystals or whether it was, you know, psychedelics. Salvia trips only last 30 seconds. But I'm telling you, people talk about like crazy, like, yeah, time warps.
Yeah.
You know, I'll talk about later. We'll go into my own psychedelic experiences that they're just not fun. But yeah, you know,
we'll save a lot of the war stories for another stream. That way we have a lot of fodder to
Is that what did he say? Orthodox war stories? What was the comment?
Yeah, ortho party war stories.
Yeah, dude. That's for sure, man. Like, but you know, again, I think the overall message in those situations was that I legitimately, looking back, I think I was searching for truth. I was searching for God, and, you know, ultimately God uses all things for good. So I was in Southern Illinois, and I didn't use any recreational stuff when I was there. When I got to California, dude, I was driving somewhere and I was with 2 people that I knew, and they put some stuff in my water. I won't say what, but I was like, whoa, things are crazy. The trees look great. And they're like, oh yeah, we put this in there. And I was like, I just met these people. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's how things work in California. But, you know, losing faith in the medical care system, I don't think a lot of people know that growing up. I think, you know, we did, but 50 years ago, like, your doctor knows, right? You have this disease, here's your pill. And it was pretty earth shattering for me to go back to the doctors and then realize, like, look, these people are no smarter. I don't mean that in a mean way, but they're people, and they can't cure and help you with all these things. And ultimately I had to take my health into my own hands, and, you know, just kind of looking at the world in general of how I'd lost faith in everything. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to go on this journey and kind of figure it out on my own, is the way I looked at it. You know, now I realize that there's a church for that reason. You can't, you're just too dumb. At one point I'm like, dude, I'm too dumb. I can't decipher all this information on my own. I tried, and I still do, you know, I still like try and consume information to figure things out. But ultimately you realize, like, and you probably heard that I was really into self-development at that time. I wasn't a big Tony Robbins. I really liked a guy named Jim Rohn. So if I have any Jim Rohn fans in the audience, Don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better. Like, all these kind of,
That
yeah.
was a pretty good Jim Rohn.
Yeah. Yeah. I was raised on a farm, raised in obscurity. I figured my success would be just like everyone else's. Yeah. And we didn't even talk about that. Dr. Crispy's talking about, MK Ultra, right? You want to talk about all those conspiracies that started popping up? MK Ultra, Operation Blue Book, or Paperclip.
Yeah.
What's the one where they shot the nukes in the sky? Iron Dome or something?
Iron Dome.
Is that something Dome?
I'm actually blanking on the.
I think Iron Dome is Israel's defense system that we pay for with our tax dollars, right?
Yeah, of course we do. You have Ratline and Paperclip in regards to bringing in Nazis into the West.
Ratline? Oh, what?
Operation Ratline, Operation Paperclip.
I know Paperclip. I don't know Ratline.
Ratline was the rat line to get the German scientists and stuff out of Germany and bring them into places like Russia and the United States.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, then you get into Antarctica and you get like
Warner von Braun was part of Ratline. That's how
okay. Yeah. Yeah. I throw that out. I've only heard of Fishbowl.
Fishbowl. That's what it is. Thank you, Blue Skittle.
Yes.
Operation Fishbowl.
But yeah, and again, we were at that time where, did you ever listen to George Norrie, Coast to Coast?
Yeah.
I'm George Norrie. So these aliens, what did they do to your cow? Well, I was just sitting out here, George, and this big flying saucer came out, and I got 3 dead cows in my backyard, and you're like, wow, dude, aliens came down, and it's like, you think about it now, it's like, why are aliens like killing cows?
Why are they doing proctology exams on cattle?
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so there were things that didn't make sense. Like, why are they playing in cornfields? If they can travel star systems, why do they need water or whatever? Or they need to enslave us, right? Was Chariot of the Gods.
Yeah.
You didn't talk much.
You need the gold.
Yeah. They need to enslave us so we can take us to planet Nibiru or X so we can mine things. And then they'll limit our chakras. Originally, we had 7 strands of human DNA. And the aliens, they came and they nuclearly engineered our DNA to 2 strands. Okay. So did you go down the alien rabbit hole? How did you?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I was probably a believer in the aliens during my whole psychedelic episode for sure. But I had such an incoherent worldview. Again, looking back now, it was my mind and my paradigm and my worldview is just an absolute mess. It was all over the place. There's no foundation to it. It was really just built upon these ecstatic personal experiences. Because like you, the reason why psychedelics for me were the leading edge was because, it was a direct personal experience with something that I couldn't articulate or fully explain. So this must be the transcendent realm.
Yeah, and there's obviously, looking back, there's symbolism between. There is a level of humility that I'm like, look, I know I don't know this, and I'm trying to find a source that is higher and above me. You know what I mean? Like, looking back now, I think the symbolism makes sense that it's like, okay, how do I submit to a higher power? I need to. The hard part is like, with our presuppositions and orthodoxies, like I'm not smart enough. That's the whole issue. Like business advice, people who want to become a CEO or you want to run a company. The hardest part isn't for me, seeing patients. That's easy. I can see patients all day. You can, rattle something off right now. I know the pharmaceutical, blah, blah. The hard part is when the state of Idaho contacts me and says, hey, you didn't pay your tax on your insurance for whatever. You know what I mean? That's the hardest part. And not only that, then I have to figure out how to figure that out. You know what I mean? I have to figure out, I have to get an accountant. I'm really dumb. I don't understand taxes. So it's even harder for me than to decide if this guy knows what he's talking about. Right? You want to talk about Protestants have that issue. When I'm going around from different Protestant churches, I'm trying to decide how smart that pastor is. Well, I don't agree with that. And I'm like, well, I'm actually too stupid to know what dogma is correct or not. And you want to talk about the rebellious spirit that we're implanted with from kids. And, maybe that's just being American. Oh, revolutionary. Look at us. We fought England. Da, 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 da. It's like, yeah, but you don't understand, like, bringing that mindset through life. And it doesn't mean you should just be submissive to every form of authority, but there's major issues, kind of like reflecting on our stories of figuring out how do you know what is legit and what's not? Like, I lost faith in basically everything.
Right.
And it was crazy because, skipping over a bunch of stuff, like when I came to Orthodoxy, I'm finally like, you know what? I'm just going to trust what the church says. I'm going to trust what hey, does Christ have two natures? Does he have one? Like, what did, Jesus died for my sins. What did the church? And then that was so relieving. When I chatted with you about whatever it would be, the Eucharist, venerating icon, I was like, well, this is, and it wasn't like what you said. It's like, hey, when I read Maximus the Confessor, this was his take on it. And it leaves, I think, a level of, sorry to use, it's funny, I laughed at your used car salesman because I rip on used car salesmen a lot. And in a way that, when we live in a world of selling, everyone's going to be biased.
Sure.
Ultimately, I talk about that all the time in medicine. Like, if you come to me and your shoulder hurts and I'm like, hey, go take some turmeric and some fish oil, and I make no money, versus like, hey, I can shoot some stem cells in there for 20 grand. It's really hard for people to say, hey, go put some ice on it and do some physical therapy. And I think ultimately that's one of the biggest issues with our medical care system is like, dude, you have a hurt shoulder and you see an orthopedic surgeon. You're seeing an orthopedic surgeon. What do you think?
They want to perform surgery. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if they don't, it's still the way they make money. So all you have to do is like lean one way and be like, yeah, I think I could do surgery. Cool. Let's sign you up. And ultimately that's where they haven't been gifted other tools. Like, they send you to a physical therapist. I'm just saying the whole presupposition means like going to a surgeon is like, what are you expecting him to say? Maybe he'll say no surgery or not. But you've heard that, and all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
And our world, it's very frustrating because everything is becoming so specialized that, it's hard to kind of sift through all the BS out there. So,
right. Well, we're already at 2 hours and 40 minutes. So maybe we can begin to wrap up our journeys. We'll save many of the war stories for maybe the next installment. We'll focus on the psychedelics and stuff like that, because we're going to be doing at least a stream specifically on Protestantism, and we'll be having some guys in the ortho world that the listeners probably are familiar with on to talk about their journeys falling away from Protestantism and what ultimately brought them to Orthodoxy. If Father Moses is available, maybe he could hop on with us next Saturday if we do one on psychedelics, because he had a pretty wild psychedelic phase before he found Orthodoxy with his wife. But
I know Mark Rotella, I see him in the audience light at Tabor. I don't know if you've heard, he's got a pretty good story on going down the rabbit hole.
Well, maybe Mark's more than welcome to hop on next week when we do some of the war stories, and maybe there's a few more people that could reach out and we could have them on. But like when we do the Catholicism, I know that's what you grew up with. We'll have Ben Luigi on X. Reach out to him, see if he wants to come on. I think Mark Rotella grew up Catholic as well, so he could join us again for that one if he wanted to. So we're going to do a handful of these on Saturday mornings, 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I mean, I guess it's not totally morning, depending on what time zone you're in. It's either noon or morning. But why don't we sort of capsulate these journeys that we've been discussing, and where was the transition towards refinding Christ? So the anatheistic moment, anatheism, the term of finding God after God. And that's really what we've described as this entire falling away process from what we grew up with, falling into something that was more immediate, more experiential, or believed to be. And for you, how did that lead to orthodoxy?
Yeah, well, I think the psychedelics will be fun because I'd love to tell some about my actual experiences. They're long stories because I went through crazy stuff. Like, to me, I feel like I kind of, through my psychedelic experiences, really played out a lot of these broken worldviews, like nihilism. Like I believed I was God in one of them, and I realized how dumb that was. And as I went through those phases, I was part of the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. I went down the Young and Nietzsche and, the whole Trump phenomenon, like you're saying. That's when you and I started chatting more, 2016, 17. And just like you're saying, living in California during that time was super interesting. I think,
especially coming from the Midwest, I think that's what makes it so interesting. Because when you're living there, and I know because I know your story, it's like people that are born and raised in that progressive leftist, Western culture, they're swimming in the water. They don't really see it. But when you are interested in all these different things, gone down all these rabbit holes and weird places of thought and experiences, then you go to California, and then you're there, and then with, like you said, Trump and Peterson, it was a very interesting time to be surrounded by that culture, because there's a core of you that grew up in the Midwest that like isn't part of the milieu that you're in, and you can kind of see things that the people that are born there probably don't see.
Yeah. No, I remember, I think I told you, I moved into like a real world house. I moved into a big house with like, 7 other naturopathic students when I go to California. And one was like, hardcore feminist. And, after chatting with them for a little bit, I was like, I don't see how there isn't a civil war in like 20 years. You know what I mean? Like, as I listened to her spute her dog, I'm like, yeah, I believe in women. My older sister has her master's. I love my mom. Women are better than men in a lot of things. Right. But, men will dig the ditches and do the sewering. And like, there are certain roles, like, well, we're all equal. And I'm just like, and not only that, but just the audacity to push forward an agenda when they don't have, I don't know how to say this nicely, they don't have influence or power. Their influence or power comes from being a victim. And I'm like, you think you can get away with spewing this BS now, but you go to my hometown and spew that, like, I don't mean this as a threat. You're not going to get very far with that. And if you push your victimhood too far, you're going to get stomped. And I mean that in a nice way. I'm saying that as a warning. When I came to California, I'm like, you could not speak that way to a man from where, and vice versa. Like the way women are treated where I'm from is just different. Like if you're in a bar and I think there's a guy that's disrespecting, like you might get your ass kicked by 5 other dudes who don't even know what's going on.
Right.
Versus you're in the city, you see some stuff. You're like, how did he get away with treating a woman that way? I went downtown and I saw, like, I won't even get into that story, but I was like, I wanted to fight a dude. I'm like, that dude did this to this girl. And all my friends sat there. I'm like, are we going to beat this guy up? And I'm not a fighter, but you're saying like the culture is just so different. And you get into the Peterson phenomenon, and then ultimately you just realize how fragile the whole thing is and how far and how quickly it's going so quick. Like, I'm cool. Yeah. I want to, I was in the ayahuasca circles, and you have a bunch of open relationships and you have all this thing. And then you ultimately realize how empty it is.
Right.
And then you do psychedelics enough. And then for me, from there, these were another ones I'd really like to extrapolate on the streams. Like, yeah, I go into a Protestant church, and because I didn't want to go back to Catholicism because, sex scandals, the Vatican, all these other things. But then I go into a church and the guy's like, oh yeah, once saved, always saved. And I'm like, so I couldn't lose my salvation if I wanted to? Like, yeah. And then all these other concepts that came up, definitely almost roadblocked me. Chatting with you helped. And then, like I said, Peterson, Jonathan Pajot, and then.
Well, I remember when, and we're going to talk more in the another one on the psychedelics about our actual experiences at the ayahuasca ceremony, because we got some good stories from that one as well. Yeah. But I remember at that point, that's when I had been attending Orthodox services and was not Orthodox. I was probably some type of Protestant who believed in like the majority of Orthodox theology and stuff like this, and was getting in deeper. This was also when E. Michael Jones was becoming very popular.
Yeah.
And was talking to you about what I was thinking at the time. And you were much more in the Protestant line of thought if you were going to go into Christianity, because obviously we were going to an ayahuasca ceremony. And I remember your ex-girlfriend, you guys were attending Protestant churches and stuff and trying to make sense of that. And how long was it until you actually started to go to Orthodox churches? Because I feel like there was probably a year or two between that experience and you even getting back into Christianity, but it being way more Protestant oriented versus Orthodoxy, but eventually you made that transition.
Yeah. So I moved to California. I would say I moved to LA, whole other story. We'll talk about that in psychedelics. LA, like I worked in West Hollywood for people who don't know. And that's Boys Town. That's like the West Hollywood is the belly of the beast. Ultimately, you want to talk about degenerate culture, right? Going into a gym, only straight white dude there. Well, that, yeah. And then, you go into saunas and people are doing stuff in the sauna. Like it's horrendous. I moved out of LA and I actually went to a Catholic church. I went on and off. I'd go to a Protestant church for a little bit and I'd find one and I kind of like what the preacher said. And then I'd like, this just feels corny. You know what I mean? Like the way, yeah, come on now. Jeez. Like I'm like, what's that guy needs to shut up? Like, and then I never really saw any of the tongue stuff. I saw that on YouTube, but I would like go to a Protestant church and I'm like, and I go back to a Catholic church and I go to Protestant. Like I went to on and off for like 2 or 3 years. And before I went over into Orth, it was probably 1.5 years after I think you came down, like 2021. Let's see, I was baptized in 2022. So like, and I was at St. Barnabas for about a year. So, you disappeared. Your mic's off. They're actually called.
Yeah, I had the fit of some sneezes. Hold on.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I kind of went back and forth and then I kept struggling with theological issues. Like the thing with I thought the Catholics, ultimately had most of it right. Like I believed most of the Catholic doctrine compared to the soul, like the solas and stuff didn't make sense to me. I'm like, okay, well, how does sola scriptura work when no one could read? And then you and I are arguing about the different translations. This verse means something different. Like how can and then you look into Mormonism and Islam. It's like, well, why can't I just make up my own church and then I'll just, Joseph Smith claims the Holy Spirit's leading him. There is a level of rationale that you can apply. They go too far. You know what I mean? Like, well, the Holy Spirit's just going to guide me. I'm like, dude, I'm a wretch. Like the Holy Spirit probably doesn't want to be around me. Like I'm pretty dumb. Look at all this stuff I just did. If you've been listening to me for the last couple hours, I'm pretty stupid. I do a lot of dumb things. I think I told you for the first, I don't know. And it still happens. I'll cry when I go out for the Eucharist because when I was in that deep ayahuasca trip and I was lost, like God pulled me out. Like I can't take any responsibility for what I am here today. I can say that God put his hand out and I wanted it. Like I wanted it enough, right? I think about the paralytic when Christ comes, like, do you want to be saved? Most people don't. Like, I mean, me included. I think God probably reached his hand out multiple times during that journey. But
there was grace and providence. So like in the journey, like even with myself and again, we are trying to provide cautionary tales in our mistakes and our downfalls. This is not a celebration of all these mistakes whatsoever. But, I feel very lucky that all these mistakes that I made and all these dumb things that I did set me up for once I actually came back to God, once I actually found Orthodoxy, got brought into the church, created this YouTube channel. All that stuff is now ability to reach out to those same people. Because when we're talking about psychedelics, and I guarantee people in the chat that have done those things too, if you've done psychedelics, you don't listen to somebody who hasn't done them talk about them or why they're bad. Because it's like listening to somebody who's never had sex tell you about how to have sex. It's like, well, you don't know anything. And I'm not advocating for premarital sex either. My point is the psychedelic stuff. Like so many people I've done one-on-ones with because of me being outspoken about the mistakes I've made has been able to talk to them about the same experiences they had, whether it was high doses of mushrooms or LSD or DMT or ayahuasca. I've been there, done that. And then I've said, nope, I turned away from all those things. And now I'm promoting Orthodox Christianity. And, I remember before people who knew me would said, oh, well, Patrick, you've gone through so many different phases with the martial arts and the Chinese and the magic and the psychedelics. Like Orthodoxy is just going to be another phase. And I can honestly say that it's not, and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to change because I've already, gone down and swam in all those different waters, you get into, like you said, astral projecting or astrotheology with Jordan Maxwell or David Icke, and then it's new, it's exciting, and then you explore that entire realm and you've kind of mapped the territory and you kind of know the whole thing, and maybe you rewatch the old videos you used to watch, but it begins to slowly become less resonating. And orthodoxy is one thing that I've never felt like I've been able to map the whole thing. Like I say this, and people think I'm being facetious or exaggerating, but honestly, I swear to you guys, this is literally how I felt, is that orthodoxy is like jumping off a cliff into a body of water, but you never touch the bottom. And I've now 5 years into my Orthodox journey, and I don't even feel like I'm close to the bottom. And because it's a living church, it's a living reality. It's like it's continually growing, so it doesn't feel like any of these other different explorations that I've dove into. It doesn't feel like the same thing anymore. And the more that you devote your life to it, the more that you try your best to live it, the more it becomes real. And the temptation is always reverting back to your old ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed, and I've been guilty of it, of doing, participating in temptations since being Orthodox. It's never as exciting as it used to be. No, I haven't done psychedelics, but other temptations I've participated in, and every time you do it, you have this built up presentation in your mind about how exciting it was, back when you were 25 and you did this. Oh, I'd love to do that again. And then you do it. And since I've been Orthodox, I've never done anything that I used to find exciting that I know deep down is a sin and something I shouldn't do as an Orthodox Christian, and thought, oh, I'm missing out. Everything I've done, it always feels like, just being right with God and going to church and taking the Eucharist and then doing my work. That's the only thing that ultimately makes me feel good at this point. And anything else, anything that moves me off that course, I can feel is a temptation. It's an attack. It's something that actually slows down my progress.
Yeah. And it's kind of self-evident because it's really upside down. And I don't know how to say this. It only makes sense if it makes sense. When you look at all these other belief systems, they're all they're all kind of entrenched in the same idea. My friend sent me this video about the Elysium mysteries, right?
Yeah.
And he's and again, I going back and looking at, I don't know how to say this nicely. Like hell is a orgy, pedophilial, sex ritual, magic place, right? Like hell is going to be full of all of these people, right? When you think about heaven's going to be full of the saints. Like there's not going to be any degeneracy because it's full of the saints. And all these other belief systems are ultimately so materialistic. Like even you look at Islam, like, okay, heaven is still like a party for them, right? 20 virgin, 50, whatever their thing is. Yeah. It's like, you're still projecting the things of this world onto, and I did that. And it was finally weird when I found Orthodox. I'm like, wait a minute. My whole life, it's like I've been at the bottom trying to grow roots to heaven. And it's like, no, God comes down. Like it's all, this is how the universe works. And it presents itself in a way, and then I make sense of it. Versus the modern world is like, I make sense of God, and it just turned everything upside down for me. And ultimately what you're saying, it changed me that it sucks. I can't do, like, I remember doing psychedelics and it felt great. And now there's times, I haven't done them for years, but when I started to at the end, they sucked. Like, I don't want to do the things that I used to do. It sounds terrible. Like, I don't even want to party and go do drugs and go downtown. Like, I don't even want to do that. Right. It sounds so like not fun at all. And you realize that that's the thing, is it changes you. And then all these other things push you further into sin. And you realize, like, everyone that plays that game loses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, name it, like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, like Alexander the Great, Napoleon. They probably all hated themselves ultimately.
Well, and even people that we know. So, as I left that whole psychedelic world and, Dance to the Beat here made a comment that when DPH nuked his Fractal Universe channel, another one popped up. We plants are happy plants, I think is the full name.
Yeah.
And the comments, people were talking about how stupid I was for turning to Christianity. And yeah, I've got so many hateful emails from people that are upset because I privated all my videos and they can't get access to those videos anymore. But as I left that world, yeah, almost everybody who was in it thought I was absolutely ridiculous to become Christian and be Orthodox and like become even more intense about my faith. But I look at their lives and the people that continued on that path. I don't know of any single person that has continued on that psychedelic new age trajectory that is in a better place now than they were when I knew them. Almost everybody I know, some of them got into drug addiction. Some of them, the drugs led into like harder drugs like heroin or something like that, or pain pills. And others just kept going on. And it's like they're now in their 40s, you know, wearing tie-dye t-shirts and taking LSD and like going to, you know, partying with people that are half their, it's like, what a sad existence. And I think that's a big eye opener is when you look at the people that never stopped participating in those juvenile ways and to approach God and come to gnosis. You're like, God, thank you, Lord, for delivering me out of that, because I see that it is an absolute dead end. I literally cannot think of one person that I knew or know that continued down that path that's in a better place today than they were. Not a single one.
Well, and even in there, it's so funny because with the church comes the philosophies, right? Their whole existence is relative, right? So they may argue, well, I feel, but you know, like they don't even understand how arbitrary everything is for them. And, you know, when you long-windedness answers to all these questions, like theosis, it was just an idea that finally, it just really clicked for me. It really clicked for me. The whole, like how the system, and I think ultimately it was like, one thing I'll share, I think I told you, and the last time I did psychedelics, right? The last time I did it was with you. I think I told you we were sitting there and we're watching them drop the bombs. Remember, they were in Joshua Tree, so they're dropping bombs.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to share that experience, but that was, well, we could get into that one real quick, but
well, the one thing that kind of popped in my mind, I remember sitting there, I'm like, and then I just started thinking about the world and evil. I'm like, what is the purpose of this? Why are we killing each other? Why is the world like, why is evil such at foot and there's nothing we can do to stop it? I don't get it. I think most people, if you sat them down and said, can we stop evil? Most people say, yeah, this is terrible. I don't want to bomb people. I don't want to kill people. But then I'm like, it's sin. It's, and not only that, but it's smoke and mirrors. That's what the devil does. I remember like, that's what he does. And I'm not crediting this to ayahuasca or whatever. It was just like, I was in this place of like,
just for context. So this was, I think, the first night of the ayahuasca ceremony we went to. And it already happened. This is hours after the ceremony's over.
This was the second night.
It was the second
night,
right?
Because we took it before sunset and we're outside watching and you can see the lights from the bombs dropping.
Right. So no, this is late at night though. I felt like we were the only ones. Most people are already going to bed.
You and I are thinking Tuesday. Yeah. You and I were on the chairs first night.
And then we saw these lights in the sky. And then all of a sudden there was, and we're in Joshua Tree and over on a mountain range way across from us, just massive explosions. Boom, boom. And then it took a while for us to hear the noise, but it was loud. And it was probably like 4 or 5 major explosions. And of course, when you're inebriated, weird things happen. We're like, what the hell was that?
Aliens. Yeah. No, it's crazy. Yeah. But like I said, to me, that was a kind of, I think the turning point, at least from psychedelics, that I realized all the smoke and mirrors. And that's just honestly what the devil does. You know, he just trick, and like you see it, like every celebrity, every other belief system, like you realize that Christ is the truth.
Right.
And that's it. And again, it just clicked all these things. I am the way and the truth and the life. Oh, honestly, like my whole perception of reality, my operating system by default is Christianity, and all this other stuff is gunk that has gotten in the way. And that, like, oh, the noose, like all these ideas. I'm like, the theosis, the noose. I'm like, wow, there were people who lived before me that for hundreds of years thought of these things. Like that was really cool. You know what I mean? When you like think about these concepts that, you know, you and I are 21 and we're high and we're like, bro, how does God work? You know, and then you're like, oh yeah, Maximus Confessor has like 10 different books on that, you know, and then they're actually very fruitful. So the richness, and like you're saying, it's just that the other example I use is kind of like you're on a spaceship and you're going towards a planet and you see the planet and you're getting closer. Like, you know, let's say you've been on your ship for 2 years. It's like the dot hasn't gotten any bigger.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, you're 2 years closer to cry to God, but then you realize how far away you are.
Right.
Ultimately, which is a beautiful thing, you know, because I've been in a place where I thought I knew everything and it was really dumb and it sucked.
Right. And I'll say for me, because I want to get into the ayahuasca ceremony more in the next one, but as I mentioned, and I've said this multiple times in streams, you know, the big takeaway for me was that I had the realization that Christ was literally real. Like I was at that time, I loved the concept of logos. I took that whole Orthodox class as a non-believer, and I loved the depth of the theology and the philosophy of Orthodoxy. But for me, you know, Christ could still be an archetype. He could still be a symbol. He could still be the arrow pointing to who we are. But that ayahuasca ceremony was like, the realization was like, obviously God had to become a man so that he could judge mankind and be the perfect, pure heart for that judgment. And then it was time for me to build. And that's when I remember telling you that, like, I'm going to do this YouTube channel and I'm going to do it full time. And I'm going to make 3 videos a week and I don't know what's going to happen. And so for me, like this YouTube channel, still small. I mean, we're almost there to 30,000. We're 29,000 right now.
Hit that like and subscribe.
Hit that like and subscribe. But we'll eventually have a 30,000 sub party. But it's been so much slower going than the Fractal Universe channel. I mean, when I stopped posting, it was almost at 100,000. Like it was like at 94,000 subs, 95, somewhere around there. And so if I just posted for another 6 months, I would have got, you know, a YouTube plaque for the 100,000 mark. But the more I devoted myself to orthodoxy, to this new endeavor, and then moving back home, taking it seriously, joining a church immediately as I came back home, found the closest Orthodox church, the parish I still attend today. In fact, we have a men's group meeting tonight after Vespers. That it's been an incredibly enriching, and it's not, you know, other people have had really beautiful mystical experiences in their Orthodox journey. I have not. And I've had people ask me, like, you know, when did you have like your, you know, euphoric moment in regards to your relationship with Christ? And it's like, I really haven't had that. And I think that's what I needed, because I pursued ecstasy, not just the drug, but like personal ecstasy throughout my entire 20s. And it took me like God providing the answer, the truth, the church, and then like not giving me that and like forcing me to work on myself and become better. And then in that process, deepening my relationship with God and my faith to where now it's like, I can't imagine turning away from it. And God, you know, God willing, please don't ever let me, don't let me fall to temptation. Don't let me fall to the delusion of the demons. But it was participating in the life of the church is what brought all the Orthodox theology into a lived experience. And I think that's a huge dimension. And as we move through the series and we talk more about, you know, highfalutin theology and ideas, I knew a lot of that stuff before becoming a catechumen. But it's when you become a catechumen and you're in a parish and you got to be there to help the old women for the bake sale that you put all this stuff into practice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like you're if you know all the theology and you know, and you've read all the saints and the patristics, and yet you're still just doing it all by yourself, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean anything. Gnosis doesn't save you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the problem with maybe some young people that really love orthodoxy as an ideology, but really that's kind of undermine or underlays a sort of Gnostic presupposition that by knowing the patristic theology, by knowing the essence energy distinction, by being able to articulate the doctrines and the dogmas, that somehow you're closer to Christ. And it's like, no, it's not that at all. It's participating in the life of the parish. And when you meet an old woman that doesn't know anything about all this theology stuff, but you can see in her eyes and the way she treats people in her life, like, damn, she's way closer to God than I am.
She's standing, we're 3.5 hours into Pascha, and I'm like, man, my back hurts. And she's just over there, like 10 of them at my church are just sitting there like, 3:30 in the morning, just praying away. And I'm like, man, my back hurts. Like, I'm ready to get out of here. Can we get some, I'm ready to break this fast. Yeah. And it's also crazy, like you're saying, that at least to me, Orthodoxy helped me also be awake of like demonic attack. Like it literally put everything. Once I found out Orthodoxy, all these experiences that we just talked about made sense. Like and again, maybe we get into a stream on the Nephilim and the aliens and all this. Like, oh yeah, those are demons. You know what I mean? Like, these are the Nephilim. Like, you want to talk about Ra and Horus. Oh yeah, these are demigods that are here to lead you into a path of destruction. And they are going to lead you to hell. Like Hades, like the Elysium mysteries talk about like being in Hades and stuff. It's like, huh. I told you I had that book on my shelf for astral projection, and the pen name was Beelzebub. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
This is written by a demon. This book I have is written by a demon. Hollywood, like all the things. I'm like, oh, this is spiritual warfare. I remember you did a stream.
I remember having that conversation in your apartment where you were talking about this astral projecting book that you loved, and it was like, yeah, it's written by somebody by the name Beelzebub. And I'm like, I remember we were talking on your couch in your apartment there in Irvine. It's like the symbolic warfare, and it's like it's hard moving out of the new age. Maybe not always, but I think for some people to really appreciate the spiritual warfare. And it's like, it's not that person is Beelzebub, as the Gnostic text said, is the demiurgic creator of the universe. It's that demon has influenced that person so much that they willingly choose to identify with it. And it's, so again, it's like a both and. It's both the working of the demon on the person, but the person accepting it by free will and becoming it. And it's like, I remember us talking, is like, yeah, dude, look, it's total spiritual warfare. Like, this stuff leads people to be possessed, and it's literally written by somebody who identifies as a demon, whether they think it's a demon or not. I'm sure if you ask them, they're like, no, Beelzebub, I'm not demonic. I'm Gnostic, and I'm, just trying to highlight something. And it's like, no. And so that full appreciation, I think, is huge.
Yeah. And you just, again, you see the scripture, like, I think we are legion. Oh yeah. that person has multiple personality disorder. Like you see these tricks,
well, like them identifying as they, them. I mean, that to me, that is legion. I mean, that schizophrenic multi-polarization of your personalities. I mean, you've lost yourself. And I think that's, again, part of the transgender movement is, I think that it is a real demonic warfare, because the whole intent of the demons is to get us to destroy ourselves. And so participating in sin, as we've already discussed, is literal death. And cutting off your genitalia and the ability to reproduce, which is a blessing, the ultimate blessing from God is life. It's like incredibly demonic. But it also shows in the West, again, the series Finding God in the West, how many people are so blind to God. How many people are so blind of that spiritual reality? How many people are so blind that, these mothers are like forcibly transitioning their young boys because they played with Barbies a couple times, or they like the color pink or sky blue, and now they're a girl. It's sad. And unfortunately in the West, I think why Orthodoxy is the fastest growing religion in most Western nations is because of authentic searching, because it's not on billboards, right? So when we're talking about finding God in the West, everything that is promoted, everything that is known, are all paths that come short to some degree. And I include Catholicism and Protestantism in that, but then everything else that's an option. Where do you find about Orthodoxy? And the only way you find it is if you just keep searching.
Mm-hmm. And again, it just, that connects to it being the truth. And you realize how the world has distorted the truth as much as possible. And in me, I think I said the symbolism, like, okay, just the idea of like, okay, a woman cuts off her breasts. It's like, what are breasts? They're meant to give, like in a weird, like not to get too weird, but like they're meant to breastfeed, to give to a baby, to give life to, like you're saying, you cut off your genitalia to reproduce. And it's the greatest blessing from God, ultimately. Right. And the arrogance of me thinking I know better than God. Can't really get more satanic than that. I mean, and that's, part of the series. It's really hard when you meet someone who goes, yeah, I'm thinking about transitioning. I'm like, that's satanic. Like, it just blows past them, right? They're like, you're a weird religious zealot. It's like, no, like, we got to break this down over 3 hours. But what you're doing is literally a form of possession.
Right.
And it's just hard. But like you're saying, if people, God bless Redeem Zoomer. Hopefully one day he'll join the team. Him, Jordan Peterson, I think a lot of those out there, who knows, but that's our job to pray for them. But if they stay curious, there are roadblocks.
Right.
But, and ultimately we can always blame ourselves. St. Seraphim Sarov, church I go to, right? Acquire the Holy Spirit. Thousands around you be saved. So we take responsibility. We're not doing good enough, people.
Right. And that's the ongoing life of the Orthodox Christian, the sola fide that you can make your altar call and then be saved is such a presumptuous attitude that I think for some people can certainly stall their spiritual progression, because as Orthodox, we are made aware that we can lose our salvation. Not that the salvation that Christ offers isn't always there. Of course it is, along with his forgiveness. But my actions and how I choose to utilize my free will can ultimately damn me. And that's then a daily battle. And that's the life of the Christian. And, when we talk about, I'm sure we should do a stream just on orthodoxy in this. So as we deconstruct Protestantism and Catholicism, New Age and psychedelics, we should also do one on why orthodoxy is the answer. And, the young men finding something that's challenging, finding a true patriarchy, finding something historical, finding something that other men have died for, finding something that has a warrior mentality, a warrior spirit. We have warrior saints.
That's my dude.
Where in the West could a person find that? I mean, the only other option, I think, is Islam. And that's why, the Andrew Tates of the world appeal to it, and why Islam is appealing, because you can have your 4 wives if you're wealthy. You can, you can have many of the pleasures of the world, and you can have that sort of militaristic mentality, but Orthodoxy has all that plus some. And I see Orthodoxy only growing in the West. More and more people are going to come to it. But it's what I love about it, and why I think the fact that we don't publicize is a double-edged sword. And on the benefit side is it brings people to the church that have already looked at things. I've never met somebody who came to the Orthodox Church who didn't, as a convert, who doesn't have some type of story, some type of journey that they've been searching for. Like they've been putting effort towards spiritual advancement and found it, because it's not on a billboard, as I said. So I think that's a real benefit in the West, because it draws genuine, faithful people.
Mm-hmm. And it's ultimately, you find out it's the only place to go. It's the Ark. Like you and I have, it's a mechanic quote. I still like some, I've shopped the spiritual supermarkets, like I've tried them.
Right.
I tried them all. I've sat with shamans and, Native American. I've been to Peru. I've been to peyote, like whatever, like I've done it. Like they're all garbage. I don't know what to tell you. They're not going to get you anywhere. And I've had that thought too, people are like, well, it's just another, I'm
not praying to Satan's Lego piece. The cobblestone.
Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just empty. And And I've heard that too. Oh, it's just another phase. Like, no, I don't think at this point, I would hope that I could have enough of God's grace and faith that I would be martyred, but like, I just don't see any other way through the game. I'm like a dead end. Like, this is the only way. And I just don't see a way you can convince me out of it.
Yeah.
And that sounds really dogmatic, but it's like the only way this game makes sense is if orthodoxy is true. They just don't work. The other ways just don't work.
Well, and I'll say this as well, that, and I've said this multiple times, how Christ gives us eyes to see and use last Sunday was the healing of the blind man, the man born blind, the man born without eyes, according to tradition. And so Christ doesn't just give him vision. He creates, again, identifying him back to Genesis. He creates something that didn't exist in that person through, again, the dust, the spittle, the dirt, and his own energy. So that is what I feel like the Orthodox Church does. So just last night, I was with the What We're Now guys, and if you are outside this little small world of Orthodoxy, you would think that we're nuts. But the more you go into it and the more you develop this relationship, and the more I truly, sincerely believe that Christ opens your eyes to see, like that, the parable of the blind man is the parable of all of us as we get closer to him and recognize him as the Messiah, right? Because in that Bible reading of last Sunday, Christ heals his eyes. And then the Pharisees ask, well, who did this? He tells them who did this. And then they chastise that Christ couldn't do that, that's only God could do something like that. But then the blind man comes back to Christ and recognizes him as Messiah. And that's what happens as your eyes become more open. You see Christ is the truth. He is the way. He is the life. He did come. It's all real. It's all real. And when you adopt that, again, and I've talked about this with people in my premium members group, geopolitics, the pesticide, everything that's going on, all the conspiracy theories, again, it leads back to Christ. Christ is at the bottom of the rabbit hole. And once you see that, that's what I mean. This isn't a phase. I don't see how I could ever be argued out or convinced out of the direction that I'm at now, because the first time all the pieces fall into place is when I dive deeper and deeper into orthodoxy, and more pieces continue to fall into place.
Yeah, it's the cornerstone. And the richness, like, you can be, since becoming orthodoxy, rehearing the gospels every time you see it with the new, like you're saying, a new set of eyes. Like you've heard, I've heard that parable before, but I forget. I'm like, oh yeah, God created Adam out of dirt. Jesus spit. Like, he's putting, like you're saying, his energy is in that. And the richness of, before Orthodox theophanies, just reading the Old Testament, completely different. Like, now I think, like the pre-incarnate Logos is who's in the garden. Like, but I didn't even think about that. I'm like, well, how did he talk? He didn't have a mouth. I guess he'd have to have a mouth. But then again, there are some that are mysteries.
Well, he's the word. He is language. The ability to facilitate communication itself. The Logos, Jesus Christ.
Which again is this difference between rationalizing and just like he is the rules.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and isn't that the whole idea of who am I? I am the thing that
I am that I am.
Yeah.
I am fundamental being.
Yeah.
Existence itself.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And you can just, you read about the life. You could spend your entire life reading one church father almost.
We got a spy.
What's up? I know Seraphin. Seraphin would be fun to have on the stream, dude. Seraphin we've chatted quite a bit. He has quite a few. We talked about the Civil War history. He knows his fact. So
excellent. Well, shout out to you, Seraphin. Appreciate you being here, my brother. God bless.
I almost doxed you. It was funny because we have a Discord, and I jumped in, and when I'm in Discord, I have a name that I go into cryptocurrency channels and stuff. And so we started a new one, and I joined it, and I said, hey, fellow ortho bros, I am not a CIA, because we had a specific link, and my name came in, and I had a different picture and stuff. He goes, I have to ask him. I'll ask him at church tomorrow because he knew who I was still though. It's like, oh, I know who this is, Dr. Mo. You know,
he's already done your background check. He actually knows your entire crypto wallet.
That could be too. I'm pretty dumb. So Lord have mercy on me. It's the grace of God that keeps me safe. That's for sure.
Well, is there anything you want to say before hopping off here? We're getting ready to hit 3.5 hours.
It's fun as always, man. You got any other chats or comments that we should
I'm just checking. I don't see any more super chats. So I think we are up to speed on everything there. But yeah, so we're going to be back next Saturday, guys. Do you want to do New Age and psychedelics, and we can finish some of our war stories next Saturday, and then maybe the following Saturday from there we could do Catholicism or Protestantism?
Yeah, we got to figure out, how we want to, like I know there are plenty of other people who have, and part of what I enjoy, not only speaking with you, with other Orthodox, is figuring out how to, I don't know how to say it, communicating with normie, like kind of figuring out like, hey, my friend had this issue, and a lot of, to not be too Protestant, like testimonial wise, like, hey, this is how, kind of like a lighter form of apologetics, not necessarily combative. So, but, I like hearing that. Like Marcus told me his story several times about his experience with psychedelics. So I don't know if we'll do something like you and I chat for a little bit and then bring on.
Yeah, we could bring on people. We could open it up where people watching could join if they had similar stories. And when we do like these critical analysis of Protestantism or Catholicism, we can point to where the bridges are, like you said.
Yes.
Not make it where the entire thing is demolishing anybody who believes these things, but highlighting like where we're at now, where maybe we would see the best bridges to potentially build for people to cross over into, the life we're living now.
Yeah. And you get what I'm saying? Like with psychedelics, you talked about that. Like you and I can talk to someone who's done psychedelics and be like, yeah, dude, I actually think they're demonic. Whether if you've not done that before, like, no, bro, you don't get it. Like you got to talk to the machine elves. They'll help you win the lottery. It's like, that's demonic. You're trying to use noetic realms to further your hedonism in the world. Like, so yeah, man, I'm happy. Next, actually, I think I got to double check if we can do next Saturday. I got baptism next Saturday. I get to be a godfather.
Oh,
so I don't know. We might, let me double check on the time. I think I would love to do it consistently once a week. I think, I
think this is an interesting time. I normally never do streams this early, and it's a Saturday. So people waking up, maybe they're getting their coffee, come and hang out with us. And I think it'd be good just to do it at the same time for like 4 or 5 weeks.
Let me double check on the time of that. And if not, we could do it for a little bit. And then,
well, if not, how did the heck? If not, we can,
and then,
we can always do it the following week. We could skip a week if you have to do it. We could miss next Saturday and then pick it up the following Saturday.
Okay.
But I'd like to dive deeper into the war stories, and then bridge building for these other spiritualities, and have people on to share their stories, whether it be the people watching. We could do more open panels. We could try to cover the topic within the first hour and a half to 2 hours, and then open it up for 30 minutes to another hour. Or we can have specific guests on, or we could just tell guests that that's when it's going to be open and they can just hop in if they wanted to.
Yeah. I think that, you and I can sit down for an hour and a half, maybe 2, talk about some of your psychedelic experiences.
We haven't even got into all the stories, and it's already 3.5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, I expected that. I mean, I assume you did too. And even when we get to Protestantism, if we want to, whether it's Father Deacon, breaking down, I think
he'd be a good one to come on for Protestantism. I'll reach out to him. Yeah.
And those can just be one at a time, because you see like last night's debate, with
what'd you think of last night's debate?
I only got to come in and out a little bit, and I saw actually most of the question and answers. I can't comment too much. And then I only got to listen to some of Jay's follow-up. So hopefully I'll be able to jump on. And from the
little bit I saw, my biggest just fundamental takeaway is obviously I'm Orthodox. So I'm Ben, Luigi, I'm on his side clearly. Yeah. And I felt he was way more articulate and knowledgeable of the topics and history than Redeemed Zoomer.
Yep.
My biggest fundamental critique for Redeemed Zoomer was it seemed like whenever he was pushed to justify something, he would choose something of like Lutheranism. He would choose something of this Protestant denomination. He would choose something of this Protestant denomination. And that really reinforces the fundamental criticism is relativism, and that there is no unified tradition there. Now, I don't know if he was knowledge of it, and I don't remember it being, maybe it was. I didn't see the whole debate. I was live. I was talking with the World War Now guys.
Yep.
And we chatted a little bit after the stream was over, and I caught bits and pieces of it. And I didn't even see the end of it, all the callers. But it's like, that's the problem, Redeemed Zoomer. Like,
that's the hardest part.
Why don't you come here and defend your Presbyterianism in its entirety? Instead of like appealing, well, the Lutherans do this or the High Anglicans do that. It's like, bro.
Yeah, and that's what I got on the question, and I saw Chase Haggard called in and pressed him on that.
Oh, did he?
Like what church?
I didn't see Haggard.
And he's like, and he pressed him on what's your authority? Like, how are you deciding? Well, this church says this. He's like, well. Yeah, and there were a couple that they did well. He did well, and those are circumstances where I think Redeemed Zoomer needs to sit down and listen to an hour. Like it needs to be laid out to him more instead of, this was kind of my comment with you and Adam from what's his face?
Adam.
I mean, you kind of just, and I don't mean this about you spoke right. He from the beginning was just like you spoke right by him. Like the first step he may have understood, and then the other step's like, what's a presupposition? Like what's how do I understand what is authoritative and philosophical claims? They're just arguing about I don't even know what other stuff. So it'll be fun. And so yeah, we can have guys, and that's what I'm just saying, just like something like Sola Scriptura from an Orthodox perspective, to be able to talk to your Protestant friends about it in a way that, sometimes they need to be dunked on, but other times it needs to be like, hey, look, I understand why you think that. Like you can understand how, because I have that with a friend. He's just like, look, dude, history, the books are cooked. Like I believe, you look at 9/11, you can look at, the King James Bible, like it wasn't that in the hands of the Rothschild, like, they're all, it makes sense. But ultimately then it's like, well, if you can't believe in Jesus, why do you believe in Caesar? And, like at what point, there's things that you kind of need to unfold. And I think one of the issues with debates is when you're caught in the crossfire and you want to defend yourself, it just gets emotional.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get emotional in any way, shape, and form. So for me, I never, like when you came down, I didn't ever really challenge you. I'd be like, well, so wait a minute, how does this work? You'd be like, well, theosis, it's not big G, it's little g.
Right.
And it's a divine act of healing. So sin isn't like 5 bad things, 5 good things, you're saved.
Right.
You know what I mean? But, yeah, those would be fun topics.
Well, we had a lot of conversations about Orthodox theology and all that type of stuff. And this was before you ever even attended an Orthodox. In fact, you were going to a Protestant church with your ex-girlfriend at the time.
Yeah. And I went to multiple. That's other conversation. And yeah. So, and yeah, I would be happy to talk about even coming in Orthodox, like in my, you have 2 Antiochian, a Russian, Serbian, Greek. I think I counted, been like 15 different churches. I'm just says something about me.
Can Presbyterianism be defended? I guess maybe if God predetermined that it should be.
Yes. It's so,
oh man.
Yeah. It's just
hilarious.
Yeah. It's funny and not, because you can't shake them out of their, like, man, there's got to be a different way to shake them out of the, like predetermined predestination. And I honestly do think that if Christ is the word, then it's just a form of confusion. When you talk about how did the apostles do it, and you look at the church father, there is a level of it's just confusion. It's just smoke and mirrors. And then figuring out, I think that the apostles and the church fathers, that's what they're good at. For me, right? I was confused. I came and I read their words, which is, Christ being, Christ's energy radiating through them and bringing me to truth. So ultimately, that's what I hope we can do here. And yeah, like I said, for the audience, I told Patrick, dude, I want to stream with you so I can stop you when you use big words that people don't know, because I don't know. And even with like premillennialism and postmillennial, there are a lot of these words that I know, but then I get confused in time. I'm like, wait, is that where Jesus comes for 1,000 years and then disappears? Or is there a rapture in that one or not? Like,
yeah,
there's
not all.
nuance.
Yeah, it depends of whether they have a rapture. Not all of them have a rapture theology.
Yeah. So there's plenty of fun details with that, and just even Neoplatonism and all that other kind of fun stuff.
Well, when we get into psychedelics and New Age, I'm sure Neoplatonism will come up for sure. But all right, guys, smash that like. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, a major thank you to everybody who supported. Really appreciate all you guys. And we will be back potentially with this series next Saturday, depending on Michael's baptism. Well, not his baptism, but the one that you're going to be a part of as a godfather. Yeah. And so we may take a week off, but we'll be doing this at least 4 more. We may do more, and then potentially open up to open panels or having specific guests come on to chat with us about it. So thank you all for being here. Wish you all a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in the next one. As always, until next time, God bless.